Friends, welcome back. We have a very special guest in the name of Mark Turi, and his story I think you're going to find fascinating because unlike me, who was born and raised in this freaking thing, people might ask, how can intelligent people get roped into something that from the outside in seems impossible? And our guest has appeared on, what were you on? Aaron Smith Levin's show. You were on Chris Shelton's, and I listened to those to prepare for this interview. And I got to say, man, you're really articulate at breaking this down and explaining it. So clearly, you're not a dumbass. And also, I might have an excuse because I was born into it, but you got into it when you were 22, and we're going to go through his whole story. And you joined staff and you got out. So even though your experience is relatively quick, you have an amazing amount of story to tell and adventures within that. And also you can show how people that can just be, I've said this a million times, Mark, how they're just visiting Hollywood and they get roped into via taking a personality test, or they go see the L. Ron Hubbard Life Exhibit Museum or whatever. And then before you know it, they become a Scientologist. So, and then you also have the staff experience. So unlike me, who was just a public, this guy has a lot to share with us. So first of all, I want to really thank you for coming on the show. And how are you doing?
Great, and thank you so much. I just DM'd you just to see because I have a little bit of entertainment experience. You have quite a bit yourself, and so I thought, hey, that's a good, segue into maybe doing a different interview than I've done before, something maybe a little more personal and professional, in the sense that we have this kind of connection with the entertainment industry. But yeah, other than that, I'm doing well, and yeah, it's really a pleasure. Thank you so much.
You too, Mark. And I really appreciate you reaching out. And I want to say one thing on that too,
Thanks.
to people that are listening. By you, everyone that comes forward and shares their story like you do, I think it encourages more people that might be on the sidelines that might want to speak out. So I
Yeah.
personally really appreciate
Mhm.
you for doing that because I know what it takes, man. And we'll talk about the process of when you got out and how you got up to the point where you're able to speak out because it can be, it can be a long process. So I appreciate it, man. So what we're going to do is we're going to
Thank you.
tell
You
his
as well.
story. Oh, thanks, man. We're going to tell a story chronologically. And like I said, there's a lot to it. But let's start out with who is Mark Turi, and that will lead into perhaps how he got roped into Scientology, for lack of a better phrase. So, brief background on,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was born in Toronto, Canada. I'm 39. I'm going to be 40 in a few months. Um, all my parents, well, I shouldn't say all my parents. Half, most of my family were immigrants and mostly refugees that came to Canada in the 20th century. So from 1903 to 1956, various parts of my family came to Canada to escape war and
oh, wow.
poverty, revolution, and so on. So I grew up in a very different household to us, an immigrant refugee kind of household, which is very different from the tip. I don't think there's a typical experience, but I guess that's the word that is best suited there. Um, Comparative to other people that I grew up with,
Mhm.
would have been a little bit different. Yeah, so when I was growing up, unfortunately, I had a lot of illnesses, and that obviously played into a lot of Scientology that we can talk about after. So I was sick a lot and missed school a lot and stuff like that. So never fit in, was bullied. Um, I had problems pronouncing English. I still do sometimes because my all my family, their second language is English.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I was good and bad in the sense I was bullied, and then sometimes bullies do become bullies, and
Mhm.
then you kind of go back to that. So it was a bit rough during school, and certainly it wasn't a pleasant experience. That's why, like, I actually kind of like being an adult. I actually really like it a lot,
Me
comparative
too.
to be a child.
Yeah.
Um, and especially because my childhood was just a lot of unfortunate memories of just being ill, being sick.
Sorry,
But
man.
I went to high school. Yeah, no, it is what it is, as people say. Not a great saying, but
Yeah, I
it is.
understand, brother.
Um, um, but yeah, then I got into high school. Things started to kind of cool down a little bit. I wasn't as sick, and I played a little bit of sports. I did tennis, I did golf, things like that. And then I went to college, and I still remember either I was going to go into marketing or do entertainment, and
Mhm.
which of course you can combine. But I went into a program when I was 18, and actually 9/11 happened the week after I started, the 1 week after I started college was
Okay.
9/11. So I remember that quite well. Um, and it was called the Radio and Television Broadcasting at a community college in Toronto. I don't know if you remember the Degrassi High, that those Canadian TV shows, Degrassi, for those who are out there.
Sounds familiar. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Degrassi High was filmed in a particular school. That's where this program was. So it was actually
Mm,
kind of interesting. However, I felt myself not liking my program at all. I had a lot of problems and issues, and I actually wanted to quit and drop out, especially because I actually didn't do very well my first year, and then I was having problems and so on. So a lot of that anger that I had that sort of built up, and that was a big step of getting into Scientology. So how I sort of look at that, to answer your full question, is
mhm.
starting off was pretty rough, and then it kind of did get better until I was around 22, when even though things were sort of getting better, I was feeling very lost, and feeling kind of depressed. And when I was 18, a friend had died. Actually died in a car accident. I don't even know why I don't mention that, but or haven't mentioned that previously. But a friend that I was close to dies in a car accident, so that's very traumatic. And then shortly after that, within the next couple of years, a bunch of stuff happened in my personal life. Like my parents got divorced,
Mhm.
my grandmother passed away, and again, we can get into more of that program. But that program that I was in when these things were happening, I didn't really want to be in it, and I felt pressured by my parents to be in that program. I
What
didn't.
program are
I
you
learned
talking
a
about
lot.
real quick, Mark? I'm sorry to
So
interrupt. What
pardon me. That was a
Mhm.
no problem. That was the radio and television broadcasting program
Okay,
at
okay,
the
because 'cause we're
community
not to the
college that I was
Scientology
in
program
Toronto.
yet.
Pardon me.
Got it.
No, I'm so sorry. No, it's
No, no, it's
academic
fine.
program, academic. Um, so how I sort of characterize me, before Scientology was, again, this kind of like things were getting better. And then for some reason, just within late 2004, early 2005, a bunch of things just happened that were really close together. And I felt very, very, depressed, of course. And I didn't have any way to sort of um, make that more constructive. And then being at school and hating it, and there was a lot of stuff going on. So when I was plucked again for Scientology, and we can get into all these things, of course, but
Mhm.
I was basically at the wrong place at the wrong time. I was the person that they're looking for. Like I was, and I
Yeah,
just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And it can happen to anybody. It happened to me. I had 3 years basically that were pretty bad, especially the last year, which was awful.
yeah,
Um, but that's just, I was just in that place, and then I just was there at the wrong place at the wrong time. And um, I don't blame anyone. I don't blame my parents now. I don't even blame the teachers or the instructors at my community college, even though we didn't get along. I don't blame any of them now because I'm getting older, and I sort of think that maybe I could have done things that made me more in control of my life. But definitely the expression of all that anger and all that frustration and then all of that depression, that carried on into Scientology. And
yeah,
so I like to explain that, especially to young students, young people that are graduating from college or university, and they themselves may feel very confused and very lost. And that's also why people are really capable to come into a cult. They're the most victimized, and they're the most ready to be in a cult when
yes.
you are young like that and going through some kind of crisis. So hopefully,
Great
again,
point.
that's part of why I do this. Yeah,
Mhm. That's an okay, thank you. That's an excellent point that you make. I
yeah,
told you guys this guy would drop some gems because that absolutely I say the same thing, people are most susceptible
yeah,
to a cult when they don't know who they
yeah,
are. they're in a transitional phase, or they going through some trauma.
Yeah.
Any, in other words, Scientology, like you said, is looking for those people that are a little bit lost, perhaps a little bit spiritual, perhaps looking for something outside
Oh,
of what their upbringing and or the quote unquote system brought them. Because I often say they can get dreamers, they can get susceptible people, and also, as you know, people that come from broken homes. If they have
yeah.
my cult experience, literally, Mark, mirrored my family dynamic. So they became my second
Mhm.
family. You know what I mean? My real family. So you make a great freaking point on that. All right, so let's get into it. So how did you actually get into Scientology?
Well, um, between this is the sort of the small epilogue purpose
Hmm.
here,
Sure,
but
take your time.
between late 2004 and so between December of 2004 and May of 2005, which would be the month that I would join. I mentioned before, so I had done an internship during the final semester, final fall semesters, so the second last semester of my year. I did it with this particular film company. Doesn't exist anymore in Toronto. I used to not say the name, but they're not there anymore. It's called Deluxe Sound and Picture. So this was 18 years ago. I did an internship. I personally thought I did pretty well. Unfortunately, I didn't do very well. They didn't give me a job. Then my grandmother dies, my parents start getting divorced. And when I graduated in April of 2005, and next month, of course, I go to Los Angeles, I just, again, that frustration was in me, was digging in me. So now um, I have an opportunity to go to Los Angeles for 2 weeks. This is in May of 2005. This is a month after I've graduated. I spent 2 weeks in LA because at the time I was looking at universities. I actually wanted to get my BA. Now, I wouldn't get that until just 2 years ago, actually, but it took some time. Um, but I went to visit some universities again, and one day, I think it was on a weekday or weekend, excuse me, weekend in May of 2005. I was just a tourist. I had been looking at universities. I had been, doing the touristy LA thing. You go to Santa Monica Pier, you go to Rodeo Drive. I did that stuff. Um, and I found myself in Hollywood in the late afternoon, walking on Hollywood Boulevard, westwards from Vine to Highland. And at Ivar Avenue, there is a building called the Hollywood Guarantee Building. Used to be a bank. It was bought by Scientology, I don't know, the 80s to the 70s, something like that. And it is now the headquarters of the Church of Scientology International. But the ground floor, it belongs to the L. Ron Hubbard Life Exhibition. Now, I'm a massive sci-fi fan. I grew up watching Star Trek, Star Wars, Planet of the Apes. I love movies, anything with sci-fi. Looper's one of my favorite movies of all time. There's so many. The Thing, I can get into that. But they advertised to me that I was going to go see a science fiction exhibit. So even the people that were out there body routing didn't say anything about L. Ron Hubbard. They didn't even say anything about Scientology or Dianetics. They said, we have an exhibit, like we have a science fiction exhibit. Do you like sci-fi? Yes. Okay. So, they said it was free. So I was like, oh, okay. Got a couple hours to kill. Went in and looked up basically above the reception, and it said the L. Ron Hubbard Life Exhibition. And I didn't know too much about Hubbard. I mean, I knew a little bit about L. Ron Hubbard, right?
How
So I
much did
knew
you
L.
know
Ron Hubbard
exactly,
had,
Mark? Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
this is a
So
key point. How much
no,
did you
no,
kind of know about it when you walked with, and then also please tell me after that, what the hell was your
yeah.
reaction from going from being they always get you under false pretenses like Mark's talking about. So he was
Mhm.
sold that this is a science
Yeah.
fiction exhibit, and then I want to hear what the hell you thought
Yep.
when you saw L. Ron Hubbard, please.
Gosh. Um, so what did I know about L. Ron Hubbard? Again, huge science fiction fan. Gene Roddenberry, Robert Heinlein. I've read so much, so much. Okay, so L. Ron Hubbard in 2000, I was 17. Battlefield Earth was coming out. And before the movie, I got the book from the library. I read it. I thought it was fine. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. To me, it was a good 6 out of 10. And even before that, like even Scientology and Hubbard, many, many years ago, when my dad was growing up, his best friend had a sister who was in Scientology. She got into Scientology in Quebec, in Montreal, moved to Los Angeles, married an American, and spent about 10 years on lines. This is around mid 70s to maybe middle 80s, somewhere around there. And then they didn't like every time we'd be at family dinner or something, and a conversation would come towards my father's friend and where he grew up. They would mention that the sister used to be in Scientology. So, what I like to say is, it wasn't something that was everyday conversation, of course, but like every maybe I've heard it maybe 2 or 3 times growing up, just maybe 2 or 3 times of Scientology or Hubbard. But Hubbard specifically, more him had to do with his science fiction works and specifically Battlefield Earth. I haven't really read. I tried to read it was Invasion Earth or Mission Earth, the Invasion series, and there's the 10 volumes or whatever. They're not as good. I think Battlefield Earth is better, even though it's okay. All relative. But basically, yeah, basically, so there was some rumblings of Hubbard and Scientology in the family a little bit. Um, when I looked up and saw L. Ron Hubbard Life Exhibition, it all kind of came crashing, this sort of wave of memories of like cult, cult, cult. But to be honest with you, I also knew he was a science fiction writer. So there's nothing that says Scientology in there at all. Okay. There's nothing, at least initially. Okay. Dianetics and Scientology comes later, but at least initially, I went through and thought, yeah, well, I did get apprehensive, L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, whatever. But then the tour guide, and gosh, this tour guide was a Sea Org member. She was a very, very, very lovely young woman, probably one of the most beautiful, attractive young women I've ever seen, originally from Venezuela. Sort of took me around. You know how it's the same crap that works on every guy, touching the arm, laughing at every joke. It's all not, and at my age, I know what's real and what isn't. But I was 22, and there was this unbelievably attractive young woman, and took us around. So eventually, it gets to Dianetics. Eventually, it gets to Scientology, the
This
E-meter.
is after,
Eventually,
real quick, sorry to interrupt, Mark, but I've been
yeah,
through
no,
this
no,
exhibit and it's quite impressive, right?
yeah,
Because before they get into
yes,
they slowly lead you in about all of his achievements.
mhm,
And remember, he doesn't know, just like I didn't when I was growing up, any much about
mhm,
him. So the way that they present him, and this is where they get a lot of people in Hollywood and why it's sitting right in the smack dab of Hollywood for this very reason.
mhm,
It's very impressive what they say about him. He was an explorer. He,
mhm.
he like lived 10 different lifetimes. And I came out of there going, wow, if you don't know anything about Scientology, this is a very impressive man. So after you go through that life exhibit, you'd mentioned that they got you into the other stuff, but what happened right after you finished that freaking thing? First of all, what were your thoughts after you
Mhm.
went through that ecstatic experience about Hubbard and Scientology? And then where did they lead you to next?
Well, I had I'm a type of person who I'm very pragmatic. I like to try stuff. So this is why, like, I've always loved going to different churches, temples, mosques, synagogues. Like, I'm that type of person. I love it. I love going for whatever reason, cultural centers in some cases for sure, but religious buildings, I'm just always interested. So I've been to probably a center or a house of worship in every major religion that exists. I mean, so many different churches and whatnot. Every denomination. I'm Jewish, so every denomination of Judaism, etc. So I always felt comfortable with religion and stuff. I was practicing Buddhism at the time. And there's a lot of people who practice Buddhism who get into Scientology. For me, I felt that the Buddhist teachings that I was, and this, by the way, it was an immature conclusion. I'll admit, but at the time, I thought that I wasn't connecting with the Buddhist teachings. I felt that it wasn't pragmatic. I felt that it wasn't making much sense for me, anyways, to meditate because I could never quiet my mind. Now, I do meditate now. I use a mantra meditation, which at least keep up with. It works for me, so I do it. And I enjoy it. But it's just sitting in quietly with no thoughts could never do. So I felt very out of place, and I just wasn't really participating in the Buddhism. So when they introduced L. Ron Hubbard, and they know what they're doing, they put certain things in there about spirituality and looking for things. And L. Ron Hubbard, they don't present him as a god, but they do present him, I'd say, somewhere between maybe a guru and like a monk, sort of. Like there's this mystical side of him. Obviously he wasn't chaste or anything, it's metaphorical, but that he was a man that was very wise, but also a wise teacher. So he wasn't just like a monk who knew a lot of stuff. He was that guru that could then lead you into those things. And I don't know what it was. Like I was like, oh my God. Like for example, when I left there, I was shocked on how similar that I what I was thinking that I was looking for. Now, again, please remember this is deceptive recruitment, but I was shocked because everything that I thought I wanted out of a group was Scientology, and I mean everything, like lined up 100%. They told me that they were, and many people like this, are an East meets West practice. I guess to some extent that's true-ish, but not. It really isn't true. Um, they they said that, of course, they were a free-thinking faith. So if you have, which is again such BS, but that if it wasn't true for you, unless it was true for you, and you can't be told what is true. So they put in a lot of these different things to sort of, for people like me, what I say is many people get into Scientology through different avenues. Mine was the seeker avenue. There's other people that actually come in from a science or psychology, sci-fi. There's a whole bunch of avenues. I came through that sort of seeker, and they know what other people are missing in other groups in order to fill all those holes in with their nonsense. And of course, in the end, I thought it was 100% 10 out of 10 match. And then the reality hit in shortly after, and it's anything but. It's not free thinking. It's not East Meets. It's all nonsense. They're selling self-help in order for you to get onto the higher levels, and then the higher levels that I never got on there, are body thetans. It's all you're doing from OT3 to OT8. Or 7. It's ridiculous because Hubbard didn't have any other things to say. So, that's what it is. And so, again, at least initially, I was so like keyed out, which is a Scientology term, just knowing that this perfect group, this that I was looking for, existed. Yeah.
I swear that we must be living parallel lives because that's exactly how I felt. And you, like I said, you have a
Yeah.
really good way of articulating it where if people don't know anything
Thank you.
about culture or anything, I couldn't possibly have said that any better. I can so relate, Mark, how they got you. I was the seeker
Oh,
too. And like you said, they're so, L. Ron Hubbard was an expert salesman. So he knew how to sell
yeah.
specifically to the scientist, specifically to the seeker. He covered all the bases and he
Mhm.
plopped it right down in Hollywood too, and other major cities. It's just, but I
Mhm.
bought into it too, man. The East meets West philosophy. I'm more than just the body. I'm a spiritual being. Oh, he even
Yeah.
said he was Buddha reincarnate. Oh, this is a
Yes.
Buddhism, but it's a technology on top of it. He checked every box,
Yep.
like you said, that I fucking wanted to hear. I went looking for all
Yeah.
those answers anyways after I got out of Scientology, but not doing it consciously, Mark, simply deprogramming from
Mhm.
Scientology and having to learn about all the areas that he stole from gave me what I was looking for
Uh-huh.
simply by getting out of Scientology. I just love the way you
Agreed.
described that, man. So after did they give you the personality test? Now you're on vacation. So did they take you down
Mhm.
to do a personality? Did they get you on a course right away, or how did that all go down after you came out of that building?
So you know that the last thing you do, the last place that you go to usually in a Scientology center before the door is the bookstore. So
Right.
the exhibit had a bookstore. There was, it's still around, I'm sure, but there was a large, almost encyclopedic book called, of course, the Scientology Volunteer Minister's Handbook. And in that book, there's like a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen chapters, and each chapter has a separate booklet that was sold mainly at around this time, because this is like 2005, so that would have been a relatively newish um, hack policy that Miscavige threw in. We have this massive book, and then we're going to sell the chapters of the book. It's actually another marketing gimmick. But I ended up buying the communication booklet and then the problems of work booklet, because those were the things that I was feeling, trying to get into the industry, doing this internship with this film company when I was 21. Those were communication, because honest to God, I thought I did well at this internship. It turned out I didn't do well at this internship, unbeknownst to me. That's a communication issue. Then problems of work, of course. I had never worked a 9 to 5 job. Now, of course, I wasn't paid. I got college credit, but this was a 9 in the morning to 5 p.m. Job in the industry, doing everything from QCing dailies to doing what used to be called telecity sync operation, and all these kinds of things that were just very different and very interesting. And those were what I wanted, because I started thinking to myself, oh, I now know why I failed. I have a bad communication and I have problems at work. Now, those things are true, but the only solution was in Scientology. I mean, there's so many other solutions, including maybe in some cases, just the fact that I was young. I just needed a couple more years to season myself, getting a job and trying to go into the industry or whatever. Um, and so that's what they got me. Now, when I left the bookstore, then I kept walking west on Hollywood Boulevard towards Highland. And right around the street, Wilcox, there used to be a test center for the Scientology LA org, which is, of course, the one on L. Ron Hubbard Way, the public org on L. Ron Hubbard Way, which is attached to ASHO. And I met a couple people there. That's when I did the OCA. Again, I always like to say the OCA stands for Oxford Capacity Analysis. Please understand, it has nothing to do with the University of Oxford. It wasn't made in Oxford, England. There was nothing Oxford about it. It was just a test that Scientology owns the copyright, and they named it the Oxford Capacity Analysis. There's also a lot of skepticism on Myers-Briggs and other personality tests that try to make us into a ball, because who knows? I'm not a psychologist, but there is some skepticism about that as well. So I took the test. What did it find? I was disorganized, depressed, same kind of thing. And you've probably heard this before, Doug, I'm sure. When the staff member was repeating back the things that were negative and positive on my OCA completion, on the graph and so forth, on the results, I felt like he was reading my mind when he was just saying, "Oh, you feel depressed." Or "Oh, you feel anxiety," or the statements were general, but the way that they were being fed in, and the fact that I had previously been to the exhibit, so now I'm more open-minded. I know it's a bad term in Scientology, but I was more open to like thinking, hey, maybe there's actually something to this, because I'd just been 2 hours in the exhibit. So I thought, wow, this is incredible. They were 100% right, and they gave me recommendations for courses. Um, then and there, and I bought a couple books. Bought Self Analysis and the Old Dianetics book along with my booklets. Um, and that was the Wilcox Center. Now today, that's in the opposite side, in the big building that is Scientology, going vertical, on Hollywood Boulevard. Inside that building, which used to be a birthing building, I think, in the ground floor is now that where that test center is, and it's also part of the Sea Org. Previously, the one I went to was part of LA org. little logistics there, just if anyone's curious. But yeah.
No, I appreciate you, dude. I really appreciate the detail because I know exactly what you're talking about. In fact, you're bringing back all these memories. But most people listening that aren't Scientologists, I appreciate it
Yeah.
because also they teach us, Mark, to never go past a word that you don't understand and to define everything. So it's like
Yes.
I'm not, it re-stimulates me every time I have to jump in and explain the words or whatever. No, that was excellent. God
Oh, I
damn, dude.
know.
I can just so relate to what you're talking about
Yeah.
because you're describing exactly what I went through. It's all
Mm,
so logical. It's presented where you're no red flags are going off. In the books that you described, the
that's right.
problems of work, that's a very if you don't know what you're stepping into, which is the aliens, and all, it gets so wild the higher up you go, and you get robbed of your money and your family, and then your world gets smaller and smaller, and it's us against them, and the outside, you're gonna have all these phobias implanted into you. Before you get into all that stuff, this book that Mark's talking about, Problems of Work, helped me out massively to get my statistics up.
Mhm.
And I applied it to my acting career. And if you just stay at that level, and by the way, there's snags to all of these things. They all circle back around to
Mhm, mhm.
Scientology. They're the cheese to get you in. They have half truths. It's all bullshit. But if you don't
Yeah.
know that, what you're stepping into, it's very reasonable. And for a while, perhaps, you can have your statistics go up. That requires a whole nother
Mhm,
explanation. But I just want to let people know that it's these initial choruses that seem very sensible, but they also have a trap in them too. You would agree with that too, Mark.
mhm, mhm.
Looking back at it, you can decipher kind of what you thought then versus what you can see now with even those basic choruses.
Yeah, of course. There's a part of it that again is and I'm going to hence this word pragmatic. That's kind of what I
Hmm.
like. So
Me too.
it's a practical, pragmatic thing. It's not too
Yeah.
much theory, although I like theory, but it's not too much of that. It's just like, here's what we're going to do. You're going to actually sit in a chair, 3 feet, and so you're going to actually close your eyes, like you're doing something. You're thinking about things. You've got a process that's there's steps. The steps are pretty easy, and you're
Hmm.
doing those things. Or in the problems of work, it was like when you feel that you are tired, go and take a walk, which of course
Yeah.
is just sort of an innocuous self-help thing.
Yeah.
Because yeah, your
Exactly.
blood will be moving and that gets to your brain and you might feel more alert. There's nothing, body thetans about that stuff,
Yeah.
other than the next part is when it's abused. And we can talk about when I was on staff and, no
Hmm.
food, no sleep, no nothing, but just go take a walk, you'll feel better. That's the abusive
Right.
side. Communication, of course, it's great to confront people, even bull baiting. I know, for example, sometimes I get angry when people are, in my face or whatever, but there are times when you have to basically be very stoic and so
Yeah.
forth. But when something is destroying your life, or some person is destroying your life, or when you've been given an order that is not just unethical but illegal, you don't want to just say yes with a
Exactly.
dead
But it
face.
trains you
You
to do
want to have
so.
passion.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Exactly.
it,
And
you're
it's
so
all
right.
internal. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's all
Prison of our
internal.
own minds.
So
Yeah.
again, yeah, if they kept with maybe some of the self-help stuff, like again, and I talked about that with Aaron, it's like if I'm thinking of Scientology from my perspective, yours is very different, but my perspective is self-help stuff. And
Hmm.
it's subjective, which means that it can work for you or not work for you. It's all a matter of how much commitment you're putting in and how much you want to take out of it. There's no mystery, right? When something works,
Right.
it works maybe because you actually put the time and effort into it.
Right.
It's not magic. It's just mental capacity and mental power. So I think that there are things that can work the same way with Dale Carnegie, the same way with Tony
Exactly.
Robbins, the same way with Napoleon
Right.
Hill. Those things might
Yeah.
work, those things might not work. But when they don't work, then there's a huge problem because then you're to blame. Scientology isn't. And that's when it goes back to
Exactly.
the destructiveness. Yeah.
And I think that's what Hubbard was thinking with when he
Yeah.
invented this thing. We had How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think that came out in the 30s and
Yep.
that hit it. And then, like you said, Think
Yep.
and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I mean, what
Mhm.
he just took those basic, it started out as a self-help thing. Get rid of your reactive mind and
Yeah.
your engrams, which don't even exist, but it's a kind of a made up takeoff of psychology, Freudian and Jungian psychology, whatever, right? That was the fad, man, in the 50s when he created this thing. New age cults and self-help was all the rage, right? So my
Mhm.
idea is he latched onto that, but then he adds in all this mind control. I mean, he was even up to including doing occult rituals with Jack Parsons and all sorts of, I mean, he was a very
Hmm.
sick man. He needed his own self-help and didn't need to be teaching anybody a damn thing. I wanted to ask you, Mark, when
Yeah.
you did the 3 feet apart thing, the communication course,
Mhm.
did you recognize any parallels between your training in Buddhism, sitting with your mantra and going within, and the TRs and sitting there staring and or with your eyes closed?
Yeah, and that was the thing that I think is also kind of contradictory is this, that you really can't be a Buddhist and be a Scientologist. You can't be anything.
Right.
You have to be a
That's right.
Scientologist.
That's 100%
But
right.
you can't meditate and do Scientology. You cannot do that. The thing is, well, I shouldn't say that you okay, there's a bit of a grip there because technically you're not allowed to do chanting, mantras, yoga, or meditate while you're auditing,
Right.
but the point of being a Scientologist is that you're always auditing. So they don't come out and
Exactly.
say that you can't
That's
be
right.
a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian or Jewish or Muslim, but you can't do it if you're auditing. And it's this really snide
Right.
way of like, oh yeah, we have Hindus, we have
Right.
Hindus who don't do yoga. Okay, sure.
They call that other
But yeah,
practices too,
basically,
Mark. Remember, it's called other
yes,
practices.
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
It's so you're making another good
Oh,
point though, real
yes, I
quick,
do.
man. You're talking about the subtlety of how we're blocked out from studying other things and being locked into becoming an auditor and
Mhm.
more a Scientologist. But it's what Mark said, it's
That's
not
right.
put that way. It's just while you're auditing, you can't do meditation, and blah, blah, blah. So it seems reasonable, but we're being lied to in a very subtle way that's leading into this mind trap.
Mhm.
That's a good point, man.
And the thing with like taking aspirin, it's like, well, you can't take aspirin if you're
Yeah,
doing auditing. Why? Because that's what L. Ron Hubbard said. So
right.
then just tell people you can't take aspirin. Like just say it's not kosher to take aspirin or whatever.
Yeah, but they don't say
Well,
that.
they don't do them. No, it's
Right.
ridiculous. So yeah, so I did, of course. I the first maybe couple of weeks because so again,
Is
so
this why
I
you're
do my
still on
Los Angeles
vacation,
thing.
Mark? How long were you on
No,
vacation
by the
for?
way, so I apologize. I
Oh,
was
no,
on
no
vacation
problem.
just for 2 weeks. So I think maybe a week after I discovered Scientology in LA, I think I left my vacation. So I think that was like right in the middle of my vacation. I did go to the Celebrity Center actually. I was invited from the test center to go to the Celebrity Center. I went there for a tour a few days before I left. And when I left, the following week on Thursday, which was before 2 o'clock, I went to the Toronto org and paid for my first course. Previously, I had found some telephone numbers for the Dianetics Foundation, and then they gave me the number of the Dianetics Foundation of Toronto, not the Church of Scientology. And then the wheels moved into me doing my first course. But basically, another thing I do want to say, just very briefly here, is when I was in Los Angeles, again, as you know, Doug, there are lots and lots of groups in Los Angeles, not just Scientology. I was introduced to the Self Realization Fellowship, Hare Krishnas, Ekankar, the Kabbalah Center, and for whatever reason, Scientology got me when it could have been any one of those other groups,
And they're
which
all
some are
around
worse
there
than
too,
others, by the
Mark.
way.
I think that
Yes, of
self-realization or
course.
some Christian Science offshoot or
Yeah,
something is right next to
yeah,
Scientology, and there's so many different
that's right.
cults and belief systems out here in Hollywood to, and of all the ones,
It's
Mark, you
true.
picked the freaking worst, man, the one that's gonna
I
oh,
know.
yeah, shit, man. But yeah, what was the first course that you actually
Yeah.
did when you got back to, Canada and were at the Toronto org?
I did the Hubbard Dianetics seminar, which was
Okay.
$52 at the time. And I did that because I had done self-analysis, which is part reading and part actually doing what's called self-analysis auditing. The only, I think, auditing you do on yourself until you're like OT or something, so it's weird. But it's a nice introductory. And I really wanted to learn how to audit, and I wanted to go through once I became interested in knowing what the bridge was. I wanted to do auditor training. I wanted to be at least a class 5 auditor, graduate intern auditor, of course, so I could make it clear. And that was the first step. I mean, I talked to someone there who was a public registrar, and his name's Otto, and he and I spoke for 10 or 20 minutes about what do you want to do? What's your first step? Oh, I'm into auditing. okay, well, before you do Scientology auditing, we have Dianetics auditing. And he introduced me to the HDS, Hubbard Dianetics Seminar. And I already had the book. I also bought the Dianetics seminar lectures, which at the time were on CD. I think there was 4 or 8 of them or whatever. It's like L. Ron Hubbard's one of his first ever seminars, where he's actually auditing someone back in 1950. And yeah, I did the course. It took a couple. I ended up in that summer, so that summer of 2005, from around May, June, July, August, spending at least a couple times a week on course. And that was an expense because I grew up in the suburbs of Toronto, 45-minute drive to where the org was, had to park, had to eat lunch, and I was doing that again, maybe again 2 times, maybe once or twice a week, probably 2 times a week during the day because of no traffic. And I was on course doing like 5 hours. So I was doing 10 hours a week for a couple months and ended up going through doing that course, the HCS, and doing success for communication. So those are my first 2 ones that I did that particular summer.
Now, what wins or
Yeah.
gains did you feel like you were having? What was motivating you? What captured you at the very beginning that's going to set the groundwork for all the rest of the abuse and stuff that we end up putting up with because we have wins and gains at the beginning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, my first auditing session. So they have, in Scientology of Dianetics auditors and Scientology auditors. So there was someone on staff who was a Dianetics auditor, book one auditor. And I did my first book one session. What I took into session with me was what I mentioned earlier, all the previous feelings that I had of being frustrated that I didn't drop out of my community college course a year or two before, my grandmother dying, my parents getting divorced. And of course, I was angry, um, not getting a job, being very angry, not just to my school, but to the company, Deluxe. What did they do? But, just having all of this frustration and then going through those engrams of anger and frustration. And yeah, it felt great when at the end of a Dynex session you count down from 5, snap your fingers and feel alert, hypnosis, but didn't know it then. But I was completely again keyed out, and it was even more of that feeling again, that feeling that I found Scientology. I felt like I belonged back in LA, but this was like 10 times that feeling. This was just, my head was clear. It felt like I used to have this metaphor when people would ask me about what Scientology feels like, and I used to say it feels like the first day of spring, when there's this new rejuvenation and you walk outside and everything smells different and whatever. That's kind of not true. It's actually more like the dead of winter, but
That's a
in
great
Canada
analogy, though,
specifically.
man. Great analogy.
Yeah.
God
But I
damn
used to
it.
think
Yes.
about that. So that's what it felt like. It felt like it
Yeah.
was the first day of spring. Plus, I was in LA and I don't know what it is. I know some people hate the air in LA and I get it. But whenever I'm in Los Angeles, there's, especially near certain areas,
Hmm.
it's a different air than when I was growing up in. It's a different climate. And
Hmm.
so I feel it's a little bit lighter for some reason. Maybe just a me thing.
Hmm.
But and yeah, and then of course the trees and stuff, there's a bit of a different smell that I like personally
Yeah.
because it's a bit more warm. But
Hmm.
again, that kind of feeling of just feeling, I didn't really get exterior, but I definitely felt the idea of having a weight lifted off my shoulder. So it
Yeah.
does make you feel lighter, of course. And
Yeah.
I would say that's really the only win that I had. I
I
mean,
understand.
everything else after that was grueling, begrudging. I hated
Yes.
study tech.
Yes.
I
Yes.
hated it. I
Yes, me
um
too.
I did do word clearing. Like just before I left, I got method
Method
one word
one.
clearing
Yeah.
session. I hated it.
Me
I
too.
had to do parts of the Key to Life course. Like they don't do the
Really?
course, but there's the booklet. There's the
That thing's
booklet we still
huge.
had,
Yeah.
and it's massive.
Yeah.
And
The
like
small
you,
common words.
English is my
Yeah.
first language. English is
Hmm.
my first language. Nobody needs to know the 5 definitions of the word the
Exactly.
or the word ah. It's
Exactly,
just like we
man.
know it. I hated it. So that
Mm.
to me was it. And I, like a drug, I wanted to chase the first high.
Fucking A,
And
man.
that first high causes people, it really, and this is why I think addicts, not just substance abuse addicts, but people with addictive and possibly obsessive
Yes.
personalities may gravitate towards something like Scientology, or are made that way by their environment within
Right.
Scientology. It can be both. It can be
Right.
natural, or it can also be something that's environmental. For me, maybe it was
Mhm.
a bit of each. I enjoy gambling. I've never had a gambling problem, but I know that I can get to that edge because of the
Mhm.
excitement and the
Yeah.
lights, and you feel great when you win, and so forth. So I would say that, it wasn't the first experience of feeling keyed out necessarily, but
Right.
it was a very profound experience that had to do with Scientology. The other thing I do want to say,
Mhm.
and I forgot to mention, so when I and this relates to my point here, but when I was in the L. Ron Hubbard Life exhibit, you get a stress test, and the
Mhm.
stress test is a trick because what they do is you hold the cans, and they tell you to close your eyes and think of a stressful time. So when I was there with that young Venezuelan woman, we were doing that, and I thought of my mom like yelling my name to get my attention, like she's downstairs, I'm upstairs in my room, mothers yell, your name or whatever to get your attention. And I thought of that, but she then tapped my shoulder and the needle went that way. And so that's like a little sleight of hand magic trick.
She
And
tapped
that's the
you,
type
and
of
that's
little
what made it
things.
fall.
Exactly.
Oh,
Because then your
interesting.
attention goes to the fact, because to me, I thought that was proof that I had stress
Exactly.
because the needle went to the right. But
Exactly.
it's a little, because your eyes are closed, you're concentrating. What you're not doing is you're not feeling your hand resistance. That's all the e-meter does, anyways, is hand
Mhm.
resistance. So
Mhm.
you're
Like a
doing
lie
this
detector.
because you're tensing up, but they get you to stop focusing on your actual hands and muscles, and they give you a little sleight of hand. So that was the type of things that I was able to really get actually good at as an auditor, not knowing that that's what I was doing, because that's really what auditing is. It's tricking your mind. It's
Yeah.
tricking your memory. It's not
Yes.
many of the things that you come up with are exaggerated, or
Yep.
you are creating at that time to
Exactly.
add more substance in order to get through this process. And so that's what I think of an auditor now, is that
Exactly.
you are an unwilling, in some cases, hypnotist, or
Yeah.
you don't know,
Unwitting.
you're a
Yeah.
hypnotized. Yeah, you're a hypnotized hypnotist who doesn't know that they're
Exactly
doing
right.
hypnotism.
You just nailed
And
it. Yeah.
you just know, and that's exactly that was the Hubbard Dynex seminar. And then the later one is the auditor course, and then the TRs. And the
Yeah.
TRs, I hated the TRs,
Me fucking
could
too.
not stand them. I did OTTR0 for like 4 hours one day. And that's sitting in a chair with your eyes closed, nothing. And again, me being former Buddhist who
Mhm.
couldn't meditate because I couldn't clear my mind, didn't really do a mantra meditation or other kinds of visual meditations, which I
Mhm.
do as well. I
Mhm.
didn't know those techniques. And so it was hell, because
Yeah.
my side of me that wants to get out, that's always
Yeah.
talking, and it was brutal. I mean, it was
Yeah.
psychologically brutal, and I hate it. Finally, did get through all of them, including bull baiting, but it was bad. I mean, those were the things. It was really only getting keyed out on my first auditing
Yeah.
session. Honestly, everything after that was brutally bad and just
Uh,
very uncomfortable.
I'm having a
Very uncomfortable.
cognition,
Yeah.
as they say in Scientology, while we're talking, listening to your story, because it's just
Yeah.
amazing that I think that that's my story too. Definitely the auditing, and
Yeah.
as you explain really well, it's nothing more than hypnosis, especially with Dianetics countdown from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And this is a key point that he made that I try to
Mhm.
stress too on the channel. Again, we're back to how can idiots, intelligent people, scientists, artists, people that are trying to make something more of their life, how can they get caught in this thing? Well, they're being hypnotized. And as he described, once you get a
Mhm.
taste of that, I'm exactly like Mark. That's the only part that I actually like looking back at it. But because of that
Mhm.
e-meter, which you're told knows all and sees all, and by the way, it's 2/3 of a lie detector. So it works how 2/3 of a lie detector works. Once you're convinced of that magic trick, L. Ron Hubbard says it doesn't read your subconscious. It just tells you what's in the subconscious so you can take it up.
Mhm.
So it's all very reasonable. He's describing what they did to him to trick him. I described the pinch test that they do with that e-meter. Once you
Mhm.
buy into that
Yeah.
and that it can access parts of your subconscious, you're being hypnotized and you're going into an ecstatic state of mind. And I didn't study hypnotism. I thought it was just swinging a watch in front of someone's face. I didn't know you could be hypnotized while
Mhm.
being wide awake. I came out of there feeling amazing. And then you attribute that high to Scientology technology that you can only get with Hubbard. So he's got your mind at that point exclusively because, like a drug addict, you're always going to want that win. But
Yeah.
what you just said, brother, thinking back, I didn't like the study tech. I didn't even like the auditing to get up to that point to finally
Yeah.
crack my mind and have the ecstatic. That was the only part that felt good. The spring day, the senses come in. It really does feel like that, guys. Like it feels amazing. It can if you come out of a blowout session. And it was having that
Yeah.
experience early on that they give people like me and Mark, which we don't understand we're being hypnotized, that convinces us it's a real science. And from there, you'll buy into almost fucking anything. This is why we put up with the abuse. This is why he got sucked into staff, which we're going to talk about, and put up with all the bullshit he did.
Mhm.
This is the part that's not talked about too much and that people aren't seeing as to why we fall for all the other shit. I mean, right? I mean, how if you don't know you're being hypnotized, what the fuck else are we supposed to attribute that incredible technology other than to Hubbard, which was done with malice aforethought by him too, because as you know, he was
Yeah.
first and foremost an expert hypnotist.
Absolutely. And the other thing
It's
is,
just
I never
crazy.
went OT. I never got on the grades like you did, Doug. But
Hmm.
as people like Mike Rinder and I know Karen Della Carriere and Jeffrey
Hmm.
Augustine, who had been OTs, they
Class 12
flat
too.
out
Yeah.
told me, yeah,
The
she's
highest
top
class you could
level of it.
possibly get. And that's
Unbelievable.
hard to get to.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And they're the best too.
Hmm.
They're amazing. I've been to their house a number of times. Their dogs are incredible. Anyway,
So have I, but under different
but
circumstances. What?
yes, I digress. However, the one thing that I will say is like doing the OT levels, knowing each OT level and the basics, right? The basics of
Hmm.
what you're supposed to do, even on OT3, I can actually see the through line of where it started in Dianetics to getting to those places. And one of the reasons was when I hated being on course when I was staff.
Hmm.
So I used to look through the course packets of the auditor training courses. So I probably read through all of the course packs from method one to class was it class five? Yeah, class five grad,
Hmm.
which they
Hmm.
which they had. So
Right.
I don't know the e-meter training, but I know a lot of the theory behind it. And I can see that from a low, I mean, this is why they say they do things on a gradient. If they tell you about Xenu
Right.
or OT4, I always loved OT4, that now your OTs are drug addicts. Like I
Isn't
think
that
that is the most brilliant sales pitch in human history. I'm not even kidding. Okay, I'm a
you're right. Oh God, you're right.
hyperbole. But can you imagine, like, hey, you're this thing, this science fiction story, which I've read Revolt in the Stars. It's a screenplay. I have
Right.
a late great friend named Gary Scarf, who was also an
Oh,
ex-Scientologist. He was
yes.
from Los Angeles. He
Yes.
passed away a few
I
years
know.
back.
That's
He
so
gave me a
unfortunate.
copy. Yeah, he gave me a copy of Revolt in the Stars years ago when
It's an OT3
we'll
story.
talk
Yeah.
eventually. Yeah, OT3, but I can see how people can just be like, well, okay, they're on drugs, so we got to go put them through rehab. Like I can see that
Yeah, me
because
too.
I bought into it. Like I could literally see myself being like, okay, well that's what Hubbard said. And
Right.
so maybe this is happening to me literally. Like but then again, you know, maybe I'll get my cognition that I've been waiting from day one. Like
Right.
or maybe if I don't get it on OT4, I'll get it on 5 and 6, and maybe I'll get it at 8. Like
Exactly.
that carrot, the dangling carrot, which is definitely a very common and very useful metaphor, is 100% because, I mean, you're told you're an I mean you're an OT done before an OT here. You know what I'm saying? Like you are an OT3 more than I would have
Which
done in
means
my whole
nothing
lifetime.
in the real world, by
You
the
know,
way. It means absolutely
it means
nothing.
nothing.
Suck to let that
But
go too, Mark, because I worked so hard to get up
exactly.
there. God damn it. Yeah.
No, I can imagine. But then
Yeah.
there's that air. Like, I remember in the Toronto org, there were OT7s, and they were
Yeah.
like the people that you're metaphorically floating through the room because they're
Yeah.
OT7s. And So, like I get it, and I get how now how people gullibility is kind of a weak term, but it's the
Mhm.
term that kind of starts it a little bit. It's like where
Yeah,
we
I
can
agree.
start, but
Mhm.
it's also just the fact that maybe you've been in there for 30 years, 40 years, and
Right.
on day one you knew that it worked a long
Right.
time ago, and you're
Right.
hoping that it will work the same again. And that's an
Exactly.
addict, that's a drug addiction.
Exactly.
And I don't blame people. No, I knew people. I know like Karen OT, high OTs. I know
Mhm.
Jeff was an OT. I've met Michael Pattinson, who was also an OT 8 from, I think, originally from
Right,
Scotland,
right.
but he lives in
Oh,
the
yeah.
US. So I've met people that made it there. I met Tori Christmas. She's really great.
Mhm.
Lynn Fountain Campbell, also, who's
Yeah.
OT 5, was
Len used to cut
OT 5.
my hair.
So
Yeah.
these, of course, yes,
Yeah, I know Len. Yeah.
with her
She has her
dresser right
little
around the
barber
corner from
shop
the place.
place,
Yeah,
right? I don't know if it's still there, but
yeah.
she's right next to the Scientology thing, and when I got out, Mark, I would have her cut my hair, and it just 2 SPs, and then she would always get attacked by these fucking people, but she never moved her business. She's a great gal.
Mhm.
Sorry to interrupt, man.
Mhm. Yeah. No, no, no. It's perfectly. I love Lynn, so she's
Yeah,
amazing,
she's a
and
great
Tori,
chick.
great. So,
Mhm,
and I
Tori's
haven't
awesome
seen
too.
them for a little while, so it's good. It's good
Me
memories.
neither.
But these were the
Mhm.
former OTs, and like again, these people, you're on a pedestal, and in
Yeah,
some reason, it's self-appointed. It's a little maybe egotistical, okay, but you know what?
definitely.
Like we revere the Pope, we revere the
Yeah,
Dalai Lama for other reasons too. I mean, people vote for the Pope, then it's like a few people, and they pretty much know who they want to be the Pope anyway. But that person
right.
is still the Pope to the people who believe, and we all have those.
Exactly.
Like if Rod Serling walked through my front door, I would kiss his feet and worship him. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like that's the
yeah,
type
I
of
do.
person I am. And that's not a religious figure, even though he was Jewish. He was also a
Right, right.
Unitarian. But like, you know what I mean? But it's
I
still
know what
like
you mean.
someone comes through the front door, and so some of those things are not bad. It's just the way that now, okay, this person's an OT. So, like, if you're working with an OT, you get an order from an OT.
Right.
That's a higher order than even from someone else who isn't an OT. When an OT is down stats, it looks good. It looks bad on everyone around them. Like, there's all these little abuses that are just put into somewhat
Right.
innocuous
Yeah.
things, or somewhat regularish cultural things that we do as humans, and then Scientology just takes it to that bitter end. And this is
Yes.
why I think, being the OT thing, as you're saying, really it's nothing, but within this tiny group of people, they're
It's
almost, I mean, they're
everything.
pretty much godlike in some
They're
way. it's
gods.
really it's really bizarre.
Mark, I
Yeah.
thought my dad was a god when I was growing up because, I was young, so I mean,
Hmm.
I was in high school. I was in high school maybe 14, 15, if I had to take a guess, so I'm still learning
Hmm.
about life. My dad's auditing on OT3 while I'm in the next room while I'm watching
uh,
television, and the whole metaphysics that I grew up with, because I didn't form mine until later years, is that I
hmm.
believe that even though I resisted Scientology, I still believe my dad, who's a God figure in himself, must know better than I do.
Hmm.
He's a successful man. He wasn't physically abusive or anything. I didn't know, I didn't feel like I was being
Hmm.
manipulated. I thought I had decent parents. And I just felt like he could read my mind. So, right, even as a kid, I was always terrified to even think the wrong thoughts. It all seems so
Oh,
silly now, but whatever religion, or I know people will say it's not a religion. Let's call it a belief system. If you have a belief system that
yeah.
your parents are gonna, are into and they thrust it upon their kids until they get older or question things for themselves, which doesn't usually happen until later and can often has to happen in a dramatic fashion, what you're around is
Yeah.
what you're going to kind of take on. So if I'm told about OTs as a kid and I'm in and around it and sucking up the ethics technology and my dad's on auditing on these OT levels, it was kind of a terrifying environment to grow up in just because I was at the mercy of my pops and Scientology, even though I didn't
Mhm.
like it and I thought there was something wrong with it. But again, Mark, it must be me, right? It's always you, you, you.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh my God.
so toxic.
Yeah.
It's
It
disgusting.
it
Yeah.
is, man. It really is. So, okay, so now we're up to the part where you've
Yeah.
done a few choruses, remember, he just freaking went as a tourist to hang out in freaking Hollywood. He wasn't necessarily looking for anything to join, he was a seeker, And you saw the steps that took them gradually into this. So you've done a couple courses now back at Toronto. How on earth did you get
Mhm.
involved into staff? And this happens a lot, my friends,
Yeah.
where someone gets into Scientology. They always want you to ultimately get on staff. Either give them as much money as you
Mhm.
can, and even rich people, after they finish the whole bridge, OT8, they'll then get them to join staff because the person themselves has nowhere else to go. Plus, they're so indoctrinated
Yeah.
and they might have run out of money. So let's just get them to work for the organization now for the rest of their lives. Staff
Yeah.
is constantly pushed on people. So it's not uncommon for someone like Mark, who hasn't even been in very long, because as you know, Mark, they hit you up constantly to join staff. So
Mm.
what he's about to describe is how they actually get the staff members. Nobody generally, unless they have no money, gets right into staff. But and also, what kind
Yeah.
of was it a sales cycle, Mark? Did they was it something you wanted to do, or were you pressured into?
Well, the first staff red cycle I got into was in Los Angeles because
Mm,
they did say that I could join staff in Los Angeles and then have some of these perks of wanting to be in the entertainment industry. They claimed that, you know, they do. I mean, Milton Casellas and the Beverly Hills Playhouse, as I know you're familiar, that was a Scientology thing. So there was this idea like if you come, go home to Toronto, they don't want anyone doing university, of course. So that quickly became something that I didn't want to do by the time I got home. And come live in Los Angeles. We'll get a you'll come here, you'll room with Scientologists, you'll be on staff, and then you can go be an actor, you can go do screenwriting courses. There's Scientologists in the film industry. You can go work in independent film, you can work on whatever, you can work doing the I mean, a lot of stuff is done with gold, of course, which was also another route into doing entertainment. But they did say there were people who worked in commercials, and there's a lot of Scientologists. You got to hobnob and whatever and get your foot in the door that way. But what happened was when I got home, I called the U.S. Embassy, and they said in order to get a visa to come as a religious worker, you have to be a minimum of 2 years as a member of any religion. So that would mean that I would have to start at the end of May, beginning of June, at that time of 2007. So I thought, well, I want to go now. Like I want to move to LA now, but there's this law. And what's interesting in Canada and the United States, people, of course, are very law abiding. Many people who go to the Sea Org as religious workers, particularly to Clearwater, many coming from places like Russia and Latin America, they pay the chaplain of the orgs hefty sum of money in order to just be told, oh, according to our records, so and so has been a member for 2 years, and they literally could be in Scientology a couple of weeks. They're getting their visas and they're going to the United States. But in Canada and in the US, it was like, no, 2 years. Okay. What I did is I found myself a job in actually a job in the fall of 2007, and I moved to Europe where I live now. Of course, I would leave there in a couple, about 9 months, but I worked sort of close to Berlin. And so from September of 2005 to around the summer, end of summer-ish of 2006, I was living and working in Europe, and I was doing courses in the old Berlin org, which was in a very different part of city, also much smaller than the ideal org, which I would later then join staff roughly a year after this point. So I joined staff in May of 2007. And why I did that actually was instead of going to the US, going to Berlin, was it came down to me either going to Los Angeles or Berlin. And I wanted to go to Berlin because, or at least for 2.5 years, then go to Los Angeles. But the reason was because I had made friends with people that were on staff. So when I was working and living in and around Berlin from September 2005 to the summer of 2006, I was continuing doing my courses and I met people and I was in contact with certain staff members, also OT staff members, and and then eventually I would join staff in Berlin in May of 2007 based upon the connections that I had made. Another interesting thing was in Christmas of 2006, my mom and I went to Los Angeles. This would be the second time I had gone to Los Angeles. And we happened to be at the Shrine Auditorium for the New Year's Eve event in 2006 when the Berlin org was revealed to have been a brand new Ideal org. I didn't know that they had an Ideal org. I was living and working back in my hometown. I was working retail for like Best Buy during that time, but I had taken, a couple days on vacation, and I contacted Berlin or they contacted me. I can't exactly remember. But in the new year of 2007, around January, I was pretty much focused to go to Berlin because, again, I was promised the world. I was promised an actual salary that would be, maybe, a couple hundred euros a week. You'll be a part of this new thing. LA is great, but that can wait 2.5 years. Come to Berlin first, get your feet wet as a staff member, then go to the US. You'll learn German. We'll get you an apartment. Like, of course, nothing happened. I mean, very rarely. I didn't even have a proper residence permit or visa to enter. And so that was part of why I left, and then why my staff contract in Berlin, I put 9 months into it, and it was void after the night. It's just ridiculous, just absolute nonsense that happened in Berlin, including long working hours and so many different things. But that 1 year between me like living in Europe in 2005-6 and then going on staff in 2007, I had still continued doing courses, and I had finished the Hubbard Auditor course, and I did a couple extension courses, and I want to say I also did personal integrity course and the overcoming ups and downs of life course. Finished those, and then went on staff and did my staff status 0, 1, and then there's another story on top of Berlin, but then I would eventually later finish staff status 2. But that's kind of the basic timeline.
Wow, thanks for laying that out.
Sure.
So what was he makes another important point that parallels my life. You're bringing up so many memories. It's like I'm reliving my whole thing again because Mark, they got me in by promising me the world too. And I said on one of the
Yeah.
videos, up until the time that you signed that contract, they know everything about you and what you're into. So they
Mhm.
could have sold Mark on
Yeah.
anything having to do with Hollywood. We'll get you the connections. And then they bullshit you and say, now, you can't work as a staff member and have any kind of life outside of that, hardly at all. You're going to be starving, you're going to make no money, and you're going to wish you'd never done it. But
Mhm.
they don't tell you that up front. They lie to you. They tell you whatever you want to
Yeah.
hear. You know what they told me, Mark? We'll make you a fucking
Yeah.
class 12 auditor, like Karen, because I wanted to be
Yeah.
an auditor. We'll get all your
Yeah.
auditing done up to OT, whatever, 7 or whatever. They just told me everything that I wanted to hear. Plus, they put this really cute chick in there named Iris,
Of
to
course.
as they brought you in with the Venezuela chick, they always put the most pretty at the front. That's a huge part of it. So once you signed the contract, though, everything they promised you, right, went right out the window. How about, could you give us
Yeah.
some like highlights of that before we move on to your next staff adventure? And after that, like what
Sure.
position did you hold? And then what stands out to you as maybe, I don't know, the craziest stuff that they actually put you through, unbeknownst to what you were told up front?
For sure. I mean, my first position, I was a letter reg in the Dynetics Foundation, which is, I think, part of 6B, Division 6B, I think. Um, I still I still have the org board in my head every freaking day.
I
But
understand, man.
eventually I would, yeah, eventually I would go to, is it Division 8, which is the Director of Records, Assets, and Material. I think it's 8.
Mhm.
I think disperses 9, 7 is income. But basically, I was in
Mhm.
Treasury. How I remember that, even
It'll fade, Mark,
those
as more and more time goes.
those
The
drills.
less
I
you
know,
remember it, it'll
I know.
fade.
Oh,
It's a
but
good
yeah,
thing.
Division 8, Records, Assets, and Material. And
Wow.
Treasury was incredibly interesting. There was at the height of the people there, there was four. I worked with someone who was absolutely completely an illegal immigrant from Kenya. She was left. I don't know if she was officially deported, but she had to leave for deportation centered conditions or deportation adjacent conditions. Um, and then there was me and two other people, and maybe three other people. But I did like basically a mix of bookkeeping. I did a lot of what are called bank reconciliations. I did a hell of a lot of returns, and I did a lot of collating because probably from what you remember, Doug, too, when you go to buy a service in Scientology, you receive a receipt that has 5 different colors, one of which is pink. And that pink receipt goes into a treasury file that we would have for all staff members and public. So that's records, the Department of Records. And the assets is it was my job to make sure things that were not physically a part of the building, so things like tables and chairs and printers and computers and desks and whatnot, were in full operation, including mimeograph machines, Xerox machines, and so forth. And then the last one, of course, is material. So that had to do with I was the office supply manager. I was I just thought of this because I haven't thought of this in a while. I had to locate all of the keys that people had. That was hurting cats. It was unbelievably. I hated being what was called the keys IC, which is an actual job where the person's job is to look after the keys. And that was part of my job, and it was unbelievable to figure out who the hell had certain keys to what, whatever. And then part of material is also uniforms. When you're in an ideal org, you have a uniform. So when a new staff member came on the routing form, I am one of the positions, or the DRAM is one of the positions you go to in order to get a red folder, a treasury staff folder, and also to get a uniform. So then I had access to a basement area, and part of the basement area there was just tons of clothes. So we had a specific tie with cufflinks in a box that I would give to the male staff. And then we, of course, had trousers, slacks, dress pants. We had black socks. We had shoes, white shirts, and that was everything. Now, I was not the person that specifically I actually had to repair them. That was part of the job, but someone else did that. So we kind of like the 3 or 4 people that were in Treasury. We weren't fully always doing what was in our hat. We would always do other stuff. So I was the dear income a lot and the dear disbursements a lot, including doing the bookkeeping. But then again, the sewing and what they would call the clothing maintenance IC. It's like so specific. That was the Treasury Sec. And then we had an ESTO. We had a League of Establishment Officers, which was absurd. So we had an establishment officer who ended up just doing Treasury stuff anyway. Um, it was constantly bureaucratic. It was constant insanity.
Yeah.
It was nuts. I don't know even how to describe it. It was just chaos every day.
Is it still the auditing that you had in that original Dianetic session that's keeping you hooked to go through all this insanity? Are you having any kind of cognitive dissonance kicking up at this point, going, what am I doing farting around with people's uniforms when I thought I was going to do something along the lines of LA, my original dreams? In other words, were you so far removed with what you did on staff as to what you originally thought you were getting into Scientology for when you were first introduced? In other words,
Well,
people
the
might be
biggest,
asking, like,
yeah,
why
yeah.
stay? Why not leave on day 2, Mark? I mean, you can suss that this isn't kind of what you're promised. You would have
Mhm.
learned quickly on that you're not making the money that you were promised. You're probably starving like
Oh
any other
God, no.
staff member. So
Mhm.
what kind of was keeping you in that when were you trying to get out of there? What was your mental state?
Actually, so first of all, we go back to sort of distractions from and
Hmm.
cognitive dissonance. I was working this very bizarre schedule called full time. It's basically a Sea Org
Full
schedule. I don't
time.
even know if there's a policy for it, but it was invented where essentially in total you're working around 90 to 95 hours a week. Usually I was working 5 days a week from 9 in the morning till 11 at night. And then
Hmm.
2 days a week I was working from 1 in the afternoon till 11 at night. So there's not much time to think. There's not,
Right.
not much time to react. There's in Treasury, especially on a Thursday and a Wednesday, because that's the day before Thursday, and the
Hmm.
Tuesday, which is 2 days before Thursday, there's no time to have a calm moment where you can
Good
think.
point. Good point.
There is no I forget the word of, but there's no uh, being reflective. You're not allowed to reflect on what's going on.
Absolutely.
You're not allowed to say, "Hey, wait a second," you know.
Yes.
And the staff pay for the first, I would say, 4 months was okay. I mean, again, it wasn't enough to pay my rent, but it
Hmm.
was enough to give me food. I was getting anywhere from 60 to 80 euros a week, which actually was really great. And one
Wow.
week I
That's
remember getting over 100 euros, but that didn't last. And so by the time
hmm
I was leaving there, the average was 15 to 20 euros a week, which then became very difficult to eat. So I ate once a day. I only had maybe 1 or 2 euros
wow.
to eat. They would cook food in the org that was never good. It was spoiled, or there was something always wrong with it. And I had digestive problems, but I would still eat the food. It was a struggle after the around September and October of 2007 until I left in February. But
Okay.
basically, I mean, there is no time to sit and reflect and to think, what I'm doing, first of all, is it meaningful in any way? Am I
Right.
actually satisfied with the work that I'm doing? And if not, then that there's no way out. I was so
Yeah.
guilty that if I left staff, I would get a um, a freeloader bill, and
Yes.
people are terrified of the freeloader bill. And I know that it can
Yeah.
sound a little strange, right? You have to
Yeah.
understand that Scientology costs a whole hell of a lot of money. And if you don't have
Exactly.
that money, you join staff.
Exactly.
So if you're joining staff, you're getting your 2.5 hours a day, which most people don't take. I didn't.
Yeah.
But regardless, you think one day I'm going to be I'm going to be OT. I'm going to go through the first wall of fire, OT3. That's what your goal is. Well, first it's clear, of course. Then it's the
Hmm.
first wall of fire, second wall of fire, and then finishing OT7, going up to OT8, right?
Right.
So that's what
Right.
your target is. So you're told that you can do that when you're a staff member, but I
Yeah.
don't think
Which is
most staff
totally a lie.
members.
Very, very few,
Yes,
Mark.
you can maybe get to a mid grade if you're lucky
Hmm.
on a 2.5 year contract. If you start off with nothing, you may get to ARC straight wire, like grade zero, maybe
Right.
grade one, maybe, and that's like a big maybe. You might only get the PRF, which still it
Right.
costs a lot, like 5-10 grand
Hmm.
into your into your freeloader
But
debt.
they
You'll
don't give
mostly
you
get
any
trained.
time. They don't give you any
No,
time. They might
no,
promise you the world, like Mark
yeah,
is saying, and then as soon as
of
you're on
course.
staff, they don't. He doesn't even get his 2.5 hours of study. That you absolutely per policy as a staff member have to get at least 2.5 hours in. What 5 times a week or something? That often goes right out the way.
It's
Everything's an emergency on staff. Everything's an emergency every single day before
yeah.
Thursday at 2. So again, everything you're
Oh,
promised is right out the
and,
window, and it's work comes first. And then if there's any extra time, or if your ethics are out, we'll throw you on chorus,
mhm,
or maybe once in a blue moon, get some free auditing,
yeah,
and not professionally. They'll throw you in to do some student auditing. It's just all your goals go
mhm.
right out the window, and it's 100% what the purpose of the group of Scientology.
Of course. I mean, that's all. It's a multi-level marketing scheme. There's no
Exactly.
way they're promising you some accomplishment that they cannot deliver, because, of
Exactly right.
course, you, people think when they get on staff, they're going to go from literally from zero to eternity. So from
I did. I
from
thought that's what
the
they promised
introductory
me. Yeah.
courses, yeah,
Yeah.
introductory courses to OT8, class 12, highest whatever. And
Yeah.
you don't have time because it's so weird to think about. But 90 to 95 hours a week were not enough time to get done my menial, incredibly bureaucratic work. And that's
Wow.
because everything just piles up and piles up. It's like it's the worst post office ever. It's the
Yep.
worst version of the DMV. It's like, because at least they know
Yes.
what the hell they're doing. I mean, really, they do. I mean, and
Right.
depending on what country you're in,
Mhm.
there's a lot of variation. But let's say at least they know what the hell they're doing. I mean, it really is awful. It's like, you know, if I'm working, for example, we had an establishment officer. Like, for what
Mhm.
reason? So I'd be working at doing something that was crunch time and I needed to do it. And then comes the stupid establishment officer asking me if I know the word of money. And it's like, and I'm thinking, okay, if I don't give him the definition that he wants, I'm going to be taken off for maybe a couple of hours
Yes.
of this
Yes.
thing that I have to do.
Yes.
But if I keep going and say, oh yeah, money means this, he's going to ask another question and another, what does this word, what does this word mean? And I was, tired, exhausted. So yeah, you slip up and then you're taken off like, and the micromanaging. And I don't know
Oh
how many
my
times I would
god, yes.
cleaning in the org. You're supposed to do one sweep of the rag. It's like, I would tell people like, please leave me alone. Like, if you see cleaning, if you see me just sitting somewhere reading, don't come up to me and ask me what I'm doing. I'm here because someone else has told me to do whatever I'm doing. Stop it. Like, if I were in the in a public area reading a policy or reading a book because someone told me to, course supervisor, esto, treasury sec, I would, in a 5 minutes, half the staff would come up to me and ask me what I'm doing. It's like, stop it. Like, just stop. Like, and that's what I couldn't stand. I couldn't stand the
Oh,
sort of nosy Nellies and the kind of people that just would not let things go. They were, Hubbardian, and they were on
yes.
purpose,
Yes.
and they wanted to know what you had to do. So
Yes.
that's not how I work. So I hated it. But I will tell you, 14-hour days, I could not get my work done at all.
I
There was
understand.
so much backlog because the org opened in January of 2007. By the time I got there,
Mhm.
there wasn't a lot of people in treasury. So I could have been there for years and my work would have never got caught up. Like, after 2.5 years, there was no way for all of our financial records to get caught up to date, all of our bills to get caught up to date, all of the supplies to get caught up to date. It was just like, the keys were with people. Who the hell cares? Like, I spent days, like 14-hour days, committed to going
That's
after people with keys,
that's
and they don't know
crazy.
where the keys are because they lent it 6 months ago, but they gave it to this person. So now it becomes a little detective hunt, trying to find the key to a room, and you have to interview 7 people. It's
Oh
like,
my
it's literally like a
god,
detective
Mark.
work.
And
And
this
then
is all
finally you
from
get the key,
yeah.
and it's been 7 hours. So that's your day. And then I would be like, oh crap, now I have to go back to my computer because I'm getting telexes from, the flag banking officer, and of course their Sea Org. They don't, oh, sorry, I
Mhm.
spent 7 hours looking for a key. That You don't say that to a Sea Org member.
Oh my god,
So
you're just
that's what it
reminding me of
is.
the
And the papers that
unbelievable
big.
incompetence. Yeah. Bro,
Oh,
that's the funny thing. There's this
the org board.
remember
I'm sorry, I was
hey,
just
he
going to say
got
the
the
org board is designed to do that. Like, the function of
I
the org
know,
board is
but
not to make things more organized, it's to
that's
make
not
things
what you're
more
told though.
disorganized.
And again, we're back to the
Oh,
basic courses, right, Mark? Like the problems of work, and you're introduced to this org board. And
oh,
by the way, there's a lecture called the Org Board and Livingness that you might
yeah.
remember. Well,
Oh
L. Ron
God.
Hubbard got
Yeah.
this off the whole track research and past lives and figured out how to one up a civilization that only lasted, 1 million years or whatever. It's sold as like this incredibly structured, exact way to do everything. And then everybody handled, and it's just
Hmm.
absolute bureaucratic red tape, insanity, horseshit, madness in real life. And what he's describing, that's the life of a staff member and a Sea Org member. It's everybody down everybody else's
Yeah.
throat. You know what, Mark? When I was listening to your previous interview with Aaron, I was thinking this motherfucker designed this on purpose just to make as
Yeah.
much money as possible in the
Yeah.
single day. There's no real thought. It seems logical, but it's just designed to drive people insane, for everybody to be on everybody else's throat, to keep them in confusion, to keep them in the cult. And like you said, no time to think, but just work, work, work. It's
Yeah.
absolutely the most insane environment where, Mark, it's a miracle that Scientology even exists, that they accumulated the money that they did. that they've accomplished anything, because nothing can get done with that structure. Just as a public, Mark, like I got, some insight, a little bit of insight into that as a staff member. Just as a public member, I'm thinking, how the fuck did they sell a single thing or get anything done? Because everybody, it's just such a ridiculous process. Sorry to go on about that, but man, just like I
No, no,
said,
no,
you're really
no.
reminding me of the insanity of it all, you know?
You've probably I know you're a film guy, so I'm gonna infer something. I think that you've
Hmm.
seen the movie Brazil
I
from Terry
have, but
Gilliam. Have you seen that
yeah,
movie?
I love Terry Gilliam too, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. 12 Monkeys, one of
All
my
of his films
favorites.
are
But
awesome. Yeah, exactly.
but Brazil. So if you remember Brazil, it's about an
Hmm.
insane hyper
Yeah.
bureaucratic nightmare. That is, I'd
Similar to
rather be in
Scientology.
Brazil. Yeah, but I'd rather be in
Great
Brazil
analogy.
than
Great
in
analogy.
Scientology.
And
You
yeah,
know,
and
like
that's an
this is
insane world, like, for those who haven't seen it. Yeah.
that's what I
I think
mean.
that was I
Where
thought
you
there was
just can't
some
get anything done.
yeah, and actually that movie's been compared to the Scientology experience. I think if you Google, like,
Yeah.
10 movies that have some Scientology or inspired by, I think actually Brazil made the list. I don't know, I could be wrong. But believe me, the point's taken. You have to actually be on
Yeah.
staff to appreciate what he's talking about. It's a nightmare. And I think you're right. The only reason people don't leave is because they're kept busy, busy, busy back on the farm with the rest of the animals, no time to think. Okay.
Yep.
So,
And then
and
you
thank
get the
God,
threat. And you get the threat of that,
yeah,
yeah, of the freeloader bill.
exactly. And you're going to lose everything. And let's not forget the implanted phobias of losing your eternity. The
Oh,
outside world's now more and more dangerous. So remember, we have to fight all
oh my
against
God.
this too.
You're
And this
never going to
guy's
be
only been in,
successful. You're going to die of cancer. No.
yeah. And this guy just had, he's only in from 2005 to 2008. Look at look at what's going on, and how quickly how quickly you can be led into Brazil. So how the fuck did you, before you get out of Brazil, you have another staff experience? So now this is Berlin. Can you take us on from what
Yeah.
happens after that, my man?
So basically, in Berlin,
Hmm.
I was not able to get a residence permit or visa that would be the same length of my contract, which initially was 2.5 years. And then I signed a 5-year contract. So what happened was, and there's a little bit more to that. I left Berlin because I ran out of money, to be honest, and I got this. I could get a residence permit for 6 months, so I was 3 months on a visa waiver, which, as a Canadian citizen, you can travel. You can be in Germany for 3 months, at least. I think they do in the U.S., but they do it in Canada. So then I spent the next, I guess, 6 months on this particular um, visa or whatever it was, this residence permit, but it was only valid for a year, and there was a number of stipulations. One of them was I was supposed to have taken an intensive daily German courses, Monday through Friday, 5 hours a day. Couldn't afford that, although I did start doing that in the fall of 2007. I could no longer afford it. The only income I was getting was from the org. So in the 2 or 3 weeks that I was doing my German classes, I was just on a foundation schedule, and it was horrible because foundation was at the time, I think, 6 to 11 Monday through Friday, and then still like 9 to 6 Saturday, Sunday. So, and then I was making half of what I was making as a full-time staff member, which still was BS. I think I was getting at that time maybe between 30 and 40 euros, maybe 20 euros, 30 euros a week. And then my work at the org went from, 90, 95 hours a week to, I don't know, 35, 40. So I wasn't able to live under those stipulations. So before I left Berlin, and when I was in Los Angeles in May of 2006, and when I was in Scientology, I met this gentleman in 2005 or six online, but his name is Rex Fowler. He's a very infamous Scientologist because he is actually right now being incarcerated for first-degree murder of his business partner. But I knew Rex very well, and I asked Rex, I said, I'm having these problems in Berlin. What should I do? I don't want to get a freeloader bill. where, I want to go to the US now. I'd like to go to California. Just, is there someone can you help me? He hooked me up with someone at the San Francisco org, and I left Berlin in February of 2008. In March 2008, I went to San Francisco to join staff. And the reason that I went there was to work, because I worked 9 months in Berlin. I wanted to finish my 2.5 year contract. Excuse me, I wanted to finish my 5 year contract, which I thought I had a 5 year contract. And then if I did that, okay, at least I'm in San Francisco, it's close enough to Los Angeles. And I don't mind the city at all. Had a little disagreement with the weather, very windy. But other than that, it's a beautiful city. I was only there, however, for about 2.5 months, because when my PC folders made it from Berlin to San Francisco, they were CS'd by a gentleman named Steve Latch, and he's actually a Class 8 senior CS. And he determined that I was not qualified for staff, and the reason was because when I was a teenager, and this is something I divulged on my first day in Toronto, all the way back in May of 2005, so close to 3 years at this point, that I had had some brief looking up online of Scientology to do with Google, and I knew the website Xenu.net. I never really read anything. I also had a very brief subscription, and I mean like very brief subscription to ARS, alt.religion.scientology. I had admitted all these things. They just, in Berlin, I was supposed to have been kicked off. Like that was what Steve had said. I was supposed to never even join staff in Berlin based upon what was in my folders, but they kept me there simply to work. So when Steve saw my folders, he said, first of all, you have to sign a new contract. So although I thought it was 5 years, it was actually really 2.5 years, because someone had done a stat push that particular week, and that's a whole thing. And then it didn't matter anyway that I had worked for those 9 months, where I was starved. I lost 70 pounds. I lost 10 inches off my waist. I didn't sleep, didn't eat. I did night watch all the time. Like the suffering, my physical suffering. I had back problems. I do have back problems, but I had exaggerated back problems, or exacerbated back problems. I started having problems with my blood sugar. Like it really took a physical, mental, emotional toll, spiritual toll on me as well. And to hear Steve, who I'm not a fan of, I don't like him. I liked his wife, Jennifer. She was lovely. But I was never a fan of him. But him to say, like, it was like, yeah, he should have never been on staff in the first place. You're not qualified. You haven't theta. I was giving a leaving staff routing form, and I was given not an SP to clear, not a PTS to clear, but I was given like a dismissal of staff goldenrod, which I actually showed to Aaron, and basically that was it. I was not qualified to staff. So then I thought to myself,
Wow.
I had always had issues where I was always very, very scared to go onto the Purif, because of having chronic issues from the illnesses that I had when I was a
Hmm.
child. And I just was always apprehensive. And so I was also told that even to go onto the Purif for me would be very difficult. I probably wasn't even able to do it. And
Oh, wow.
I actually went from San Francisco to Los Angeles just before I left, which was again in May of 2008. And I
Hmm.
spent, I think, 3 or 4 nights in LA at a house right across from the Asho building, which is a boarding house. And I
Right.
spent a bunch of
Right.
days there on L. Ron Hubbard Way.
Yep.
And
I used to live
I
there.
was I was free. Yeah, okay. So I was free, and I love Santa Monica, so I went to the pier. I
Hmm.
visited a bunch of different places that I really liked, and it felt great to not be a staff member. And
Yeah.
basically, after a bunch of rigmaroles, trying to find someone in Los Angeles who would just hear my story.
Mhm.
And at this time, Berlin was winning the birthday game, so nobody was really believing me. And
Oh,
I was
wow.
again the person who was bad, and all this kind of
Yep.
nonsense. And I was kind of trying to get back in good standing, but eventually, the night before I left, I just had it in my head. I had a great time in, at the beach in Los Angeles, walking around the water. I was taking the bus in LA, which is also great. I love taking the bus in
Yeah.
LA, but I took the
Mhm.
bus from the Blue Building down to Santa Monica. Anyway,
Yeah.
it was just a great day, great night, and I thought I made the decision to leave Scientology. Came back the next day, which was the middle of May, and then that's kind of the story of when I came out. I was out from the middle of May 2008 onwards. So I was basically from the time I discovered in Scientology in LA to
Wow.
the time that I left in LA was roughly about 3 years in total.
And it all started and ended at LA. What an adventure that is, man, just in 3 years.
Yeah,
You're so lucky in a certain way too, Mark, because many people,
yeah,
especially that get in as deep as you did, get captured there and they'll be there for 20 or 30 years. So thank God they didn't steal too
yeah,
much of your life. Perhaps it was a valuable
yep.
experience that in a certain way that you can look back and learn
uh,
how I mean, you certainly know how a cult works now, right? I mean, would
yeah.
recognize the red flags now. I immediately do, Mark. Even in one-on-one relationships, if someone starts love bombing me or any of
Hmm.
the, that those can happen in relationships as well.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you, like, so a lot of the times people will leave and they still believe in the
Mhm.
technology. They still believe in Hubbard. They still believe in the information that was implanted into us in these suggestible
Yeah.
states. And that can be really hard to get rid of. How are you reconciling how are you reconciling the beliefs that were probably still in your head versus now leaving staff? And then you know the trouble that they're going to put you in. You're going to have to go through the what A to E thing or whatever to get back in good standing. There's a whole program
Mhm.
that you have to do to keep your eternity. Did you believe that Hubbard had your eternity at stake, that Scientology still had the answers, and that did you have to fight that for a little while before you figured out it was all a con and hypnosis or whatever? What was your state of mind when you left?
When I left because when I was finally able to reflect
Hmm.
about what was happening, I felt that all the things that I had given up for Scientology, friends, family, education, career, etc., simply was not worth it.
Yeah.
That question, was it worth it, was in my subconscious. I
Wow.
I couldn't get to a yes answer. I was examining how many times I actually talked to my friends, how many times I talked to my family. Why did I not go to Cal State LA or Cal State Fullerton? There
Right.
was just not a there was nothing that I could reconcile. Um, why did I spend so much money? I spent thousands of dollars and also got thousands of dollars from family to do these things as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and it just in my career, I mean, again, here I was in Los Angeles, the city I wanted to live in,
Right.
and I hadn't been there. I was never going up the bridge, thankfully, because, and I swear, it's thankful that I'm not considered able in the eyes of Scientologists, even though
Right.
there's kind of
Blessing in
a facade
disguise.
there. But
Totally.
but my my heart is normal, but one tiny bit of it is a little bit bigger than average because I'm a tall guy. So thankfully, that would prevent me from
Yes.
doing things like the Purif. My back is not great. I have scoliosis. Thankfully, I
Oh,
always had
man.
problems with that growing up because I was look weird. I look kind of hunched over sometimes. But like,
Mhm.
thankfully, I wouldn't be able to do these things. So my disabilities or unable abilities, not a word,
Right.
was actually something that helped me in the end
Definitely.
because my
Definitely.
body was kind of like the old man saying you can't do it, just you need
Mhm.
to stop. So for me, I was never really interested in doing the free zone or doing independent Scientology just because for me, I I don't think I don't think that Scientology is 100% valuable, but I don't think it's 0% invaluable. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
like just subjective, and I'm not into this self-help. I started getting away from actually wanting auditing, and it did take like a decade, but eventually I would find therapy much better for me. So,
Mm-hmm.
any resonance of Hubbard, what I like to call Hubbardian philosophy, that was exiting my brain pretty quickly after I left because
Interesting.
I didn't, I only had that one experience of in auditing that was good. I
Right,
hated the
right,
successfor communication course. I hated the
right.
ups and downs of life course. Like 95% of what I did in Scientology, I despised. I never wanted to do it again. I never wanted to do a TR. I never wanted to touch
Yes,
a wall. I never wanted to
yes,
play with clay. I never wanted to
yes.
do book method one word clearing. I never wanted anything. So I was so happy in that sense
Yes.
that no one was over my shoulders. You're going to get a sec check because I did get sec checked. So that's part of my
Mm-hmm.
freeloader is that I
Of
got, I think
course.
like like a 2.5 hour intensive of sec checking, which was I think like 2 or 3 grand on top of the
Please tell
courses
me you
that
didn't pay back the freeloader.
whatever.
Did you pay back
Oh
the
God, no,
freeloader?
no, I haven't paid
Good
back.
for you.
No, no,
Because
no.
I thought that was legally
Five, six
binding
thousand
until I found
dollars.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, good for you, man.
no.
Because
I
many
think in the
people
end it was
do.
6,000 American dollars. So
That's
not tremendous, but
that's
obviously
still a
screw
lot.
it.
Yeah, good
And
for
that
you.
still, I mean, for one session of 2.5 hours plus a couple of courses. Like I did staff status two, like whatever. And I did the exec esto mini hat, and then I did a couple of other little things
And that's
for
part of the
six thousand
freeloaders bill
dollars.
too, right? Even the staff status
Yeah.
courses, aren't those part of, and they train you
Yes.
to, in other
Yeah.
words, audience, they train you to be a staff member. You have to take staff status 0,
Yep.
1, and 2, which I did, and they're
Yep.
boring as fuck. And they're
Mm-hmm.
just literally designed to,
Uh,
as I say in the videos, to teach you to be a slave for the next 2.5 to 5 years. But that
yep.
also becomes part of your freeloader debt. So any auditing, any training
Mhm.
that you did, including the staff statuses, you then have to pay that back. And understand when
That's
we're
right.
in the Truman Show bubble, we believe all this. I was told I was going to get fined $100,000 on the OT levels, the confidential levels,
Yeah.
for anything that I might accidentally spill the beans on. Now, of course, legally, they can't collect that and they can't collect the freeloaders
No.
debt. That's why I asked Mark what his state of mind was, because a lot of us leave the tech. We want to
Yeah.
get back, or we leave Scientology, but we want to stay, or staff, but we want to stay in good
Yeah.
standing so we don't blow our eternity. So they put you through a whole program where you can get back into good standing. And part of that would be
Mhm.
definitely paying off that freeloaders debt. So good for you, man, that they didn't
Yeah.
have,
No, I didn't. I
you
didn't.
know,
I was lucky. And again, my position in San Francisco was I was supposed to be the Div 7 Esto because the
mm-hmm.
Exec Esto wanted to replicate what they had done in Berlin, but that
Oh,
project, after I left, I'm sure failed. So whatever the hell the Div 7 Esto was supposed to do, that was my job. And I'm groaning because I don't even know what the hell I did the mini hat, and it was I don't remember anything. um,
right.
just tell the again word clearing the executives and asking them to quote policy. That's all you do. I made about $50 a week, so in that case, I actually got paid
Wow.
quite a bit. I
Wow.
lived with Scientologists that were horrible roommates. The
Mm-hmm.
building I lived in was owned by Latches. As I said, hated Jerry
Oh,
Latch.
yep.
Excuse me, not Jerry, Steve Latch.
I
Lloyd
know who the
Latch is
latches
his
are.
father, who I liked a lot. Yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
Lloyd Latch I liked very, very much. I don't know if he's still with us, but because he was, I think, 85 when I knew him, and that was,
Mm-hmm.
2008. So he may no longer be with us, but he was an original Dianetist and Scientologist.
Oh,
I
wow.
met Jennifer Latch's parents. They had come for a visit. They're from Chicago. She got started in the Chicago org. I think she's second gen from what Aaron told me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of there were I actually liked the people a lot better in San Francisco. Jerry Ratchet, I believe was his name, was our ED. He was great, the ED of the day org. I liked him quite a bit. There weren't as many people, except for my roommates and some of the people that were my age, ironically, that I didn't like, that were the sort of the, no offense, the second gen arrogant kind of, you know what I
No,
mean?
I
I'm
understand,
better than
brother.
you,
No
second
offense
gen.
taken. Yep, I freaking know what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
it's that. Well, I've been auditing since I was two. It's like okay,
Yep, and
um,
even those that don't audit, like
but
Danny
yeah,
Masterson, who doesn't do hardly any
yeah,
of Scientology, is still a snobby, arrogant
no,
second gen because hey, my family's into it, bro, and my parents are OTs. Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. And exactly. So then from San Francisco, okay, so then I made the decision to leave. And the thing was I held on to that decision that I was not going to go back. But
Mm.
I felt a tremendous weight put back on my shoulder because I was in Canada and I had returned from both Berlin and San Francisco very thin,
Hmm.
lost a ton of weight. I put weight back on. I lost 70 pounds, but I think I gained 40 of it
Wow.
within like a few
Wow,
months
dude.
because I was sleeping 12 hours sometimes a day. I had some health issues. As mentioned, my blood sugars were high. I also
Hmm.
had problems with my back. I don't know if you know what a compression fracture is, but I had two compression fractures in my spine, which happens because my body had no calcium. I was not on a good calcium diet when I was in Berlin or San Francisco. I was just
Hmm.
eating whatever I could. And from the total lack of calcium, my spine were basically compressing against each other, and I had
Oh
actual
my
fractures.
god. Oh my
And that's
god,
actually
dude.
something that people get when they have osteoporosis. So my
Wow.
doctor had never seen a
Oh my
25-year-old
god.
man that ever had compression fractures. It was always 60 plus female women. So that really like it hurt. So that made me think you're never going
Fuck,
back.
dude.
But then this this other voice, and again, when I mean voice, I'm not speaking in a mental health
Those
area. I
aren't
don't hear
the
voices,
body
but
thetans
it's
talking
a
to you. Yeah.
conscious, exactly. But it was the fear, and that doesn't exist anymore. But the fear was saying, Mark,
Good.
you're a piece of shit.
Yeah.
You've betrayed the cause. You've betrayed
Yeah.
Scientology. You've betrayed Ron. You
Yeah.
left your friends in Treasury and your roommate who was in Div
Hmm.
6C. You've left them to rot. It's like survivor's guilt because here I am at
Yeah.
home
Yes.
eating, going to restaurants and eating every day and gaining
You're
weight and
free.
having my
Yep.
mom cook for me. And I got a job that was, not great retail stuff and whatnot. Still, but still, this thing, you know, like saying it's Thursday at 2, what are you doing?
Yes.
You're a piece of shit, you're gaining weight. And the other thing was, you're going to die. You do not have the technology anymore. So a suppressive person is going to come into your life
Yes.
and you are going to die of
Yep.
an illness. And that was persisting every day for months and months and months from I left in May 2008 until probably August, September of 2008. And it started to go away when I got more involved with both watching videos, but also writing my story for the internet. And I ended up um, writing over a 6 month period from August of 2007 to February of 2008. In January, I actually moved to Los Angeles to go to community college, and
Mhm.
again, we can get into that after. But from that period, I made little segments, like little chapters of my story, because I also kept a journal and I would
Right.
write down my daily activities. So I would write about how I got in, I would write about how I got to Berlin. It ended up being like I kind of made a manuscript out of it, but not really. I don't know. I mean, for a book and stuff, I had it read a couple times. I was kind of interested in that and doing that like 10 plus years ago. But a lot of people have read it. Grant Berry has read it. Gary Scarf read it. My
Yes.
friend Sabrina, who was from Switzerland, who also talked to Aaron, she's read it. So there's been
Hmm.
some people who have read it, which is good. Um, but as I started writing out those experiences, and then by the time I had moved and started my junior college course in LA in 2009 January,
Hmm.
it started to get better, and I started to meet people. I was taking film classes. Like then, I was really starting to be more independent, specifically. And by the end of like 2009, that fear had stopped. But it was really a horrible 4 or 5 month
Oh
period.
man.
I mean,
I
really
know
bad.
that
Every
feeling.
day with that voice, that
I
sort of
know that
devil and
voice.
angel voice,
Yep.
just saying like you're a piece of shit, like what are you doing, you go back in session. I would get an email from someone who was checking up on me, from someone I had been on staff with, and I remember saying like, actually, I'm out of Scientology, I'm doing very well, and then them writing something nasty about how no, you're not really doing well, you have to go back into
Yep.
science, like.
Yep.
And then I got phone calls. I did get harassing phone calls from people. You have to go back. You have to go back. You're ordered to go back. I got calls from Sea Org members telling me I had to go back. It was an order. And I kept
Yep.
saying, why I didn't hang up was another thing that took a little while. As a Syriac member, I've got
Yeah.
to say something why I
Yes,
didn't hang
man. I
up. And it
understand.
was just, I just wanted to say like, hey, I'm just moving on with my life. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. But yeah, so let's say it took anywhere from maybe 6 months to a year, and then after that, there's an aftershock, and still, I
Hmm.
would say for me, it took maybe a good maybe decade, maybe a little bit more than a
Wow.
decade. I think within the past maybe 5 years, I still
Wow.
think about Scientology every day, but it's dissipated now. I can go on to Chris's show. He corrects me when I'm wrong. I'm sort of at that stage where I forget a lot of stuff. So I forget things, and Aaron is the same. Where if I misspeak or something, they're there,
Oh,
but
you do a
and then
fantastic
I
job,
can
Mark. I
remember.
don't
But
think you've forgotten.
I
And by
try.
the way, you got a great memory on and you can articulate it really well, which is hard to do. To look at, I think you sound like you
There
made
are
a hell of a
times.
recovery. But you know what you just said? I mean, it took me a decade too to actually, I had
Yeah,
PTS, I would call it CPTSD. I
yeah.
never got diagnosed because I didn't have the fucking money, dude. I was like living out of my car for a long period of time, just reading books
Oh
and
gosh.
nightmares, flashbacks every day, every day. I couldn't shut
Yeah.
off that voice that you're talking about how bad I was. I threw my eternity away, blah, blah, blah. I knew it wasn't true because I was out of Scientology immediately in one day because a friend dropped a cult book off my
Oh,
doorstep, which took me from full on believer to I'm out immediately. But that was just the beginning
wow.
because as you know, there's all the flashbacks and everything that come back.
Oh man.
I'll be recovering it from it,
Yeah.
Mark, for the rest of my life, just because the
Yeah.
loss of the family that went with it, the amount of time I was in. And audience, this man was in for 3 years, and he just said that it's taken him
Yeah.
10 years. It's still on his mind every day. And I totally understand that. Just to show
Yeah.
you the kind of damage. And then again, how deeply Hubbard's madness gets into our subconscious mind, not least because we're not just with the auditing where we're being hypnotized and getting blown out of our mind, but I had a guy named Marcus on, a friend of mine, last week, and they damaged the crap out of the staff members. They come out with injuries like Mark did. The diet's horrible. So much damage happens to the staff members and Sea Org members because taking care of yourself is secondary. It's also part of the keep you in the trance. If you lessen
Mm.
people's food and you keep them busy, 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 those two elements right there are covered in Steve Hassan's Combating Cult Mind Control book as 101 to keep somebody from
Mhm.
questioning shit. Because people often ask, why don't you leave under the circumstances and all that? It's because of the environmental elements. And also, you add that on with the original high that gets you stuck in there to begin with, and that you're always promised and chasing.
Mhm.
Carrot on the stick, like Mark was mentioning earlier, where it's going to be the next level that's going to handle it. Or maybe I just don't have this part of my
Mhm.
reactive mind or case handled yet. And also, you're surrounded with a group of people that are not trying to con you. We believe so wholeheartedly in what we're doing that energetic
Mhm.
group environment can be another thing that keeps you in the Truman Show. Hey man, I'm
Yeah.
glad you got out, Mark, because so many people don't. I
Thanks.
think I tell everybody it's just my
Mhm.
opinion, but I think it's such a huge achievement and accomplishment, and it says something about the person that can get out of that. Because many people don't. My parents will be in for the rest of their lives. They've been for at least
Mhm.
40 years now. So congratulations on getting out. There's always residual damage. I know they fucked up your body and all that, but you're alive. You made it out. And not only
Yep.
that, you've gotten yourself up to a
Absolutely.
point where you've been willing to share your story, which I really, really appreciate, man. And other people will too.
Thank you.
Anybody else
Yeah.
out there
Thank
that's
you too.
listening too, if you're inspired by his story and you want to come on, if you're an ex-Scientologist, ex-JW, you guys know what the channel is about. Spend some time looking around and see if you have a story to tell that fits. We don't bite, and this is what I would love to see more of. People coming out and speaking out because it really does have. It was all the people, Mark. It was the Chris Sheltons. It was the Aarons.
Yeah.
It was
Mhm.
the movie Going Clear was all the people that did all the work that finally made it safe where I could come out in 2020 and not feel intimidated at all.
Mhm.
But it was not like that even 10 years before. So even though
No,
Scientology might still be here and it may be a while before they get their tax exempt status, maybe it'll be here for into eternity. But the point is the
yeah.
more people that speak out, the more information that there is out there, the more other people will speak out. And maybe we can just take it out by knowledge and we don't even have to, we can proof people up against it so they don't get stuck. And those that are in will have a landing place and be able to listen to videos like this to deprogram. So I just really do appreciate it, dude. I know the courage that it takes to speak out against them because
Thank
they're
you. And again, yeah. And also for the opportunity to have again a platform to do this. Thank you, Doug. I
sure,
watch
no
your
problem.
videos as well and was introduced that through both Aaron and Chris. So it is great that people are now again, when in 2005, when I was interested in Scientology and I did Google Scientology, the only available
Mm-hmm.
things was either Xenu.net or Scientology.org. And
Right.
now there are thousands and thousands of YouTube channels, articles that give a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of difference and
Yes.
in a great way, a personal story. So it's the aftermath,
Yeah.
it's this channel,
Yeah.
it's whatever. It Going Clear was unbelievable.
I love that.
And Yeah, it just now it's more in the zeitgeist where
Mm-hmm.
I think, I would hope that if younger people at my age and my sort of feeling condition were in a similar situation, they have so much more information that will
They
probably lead
do.
them away from Scientology than
Yes.
I had. There's only two websites and maybe a couple of small books written by cult apologists or whatever. Like that really
Mm-hmm.
was all that was available in
Yeah.
2005, even though
You're right.
Tom Cruise was going through a bunch of bad press and Katie Holmes and Oprah. It it
Right.
really it's really amped up since then, and I am very thankful. And I also learned journalism. I also learned like I'm someone who again went through a broadcasting journalism and film
Mm-hmm.
study school in community college, and I studied propaganda. I studied broadcast journalism. I
Oh,
studied
nice.
spin. I studied all these kinds of things.
Really?
Still fell for Scientology. Still fell for it
You
because
studied
I
all that
just was
before,
able
Mark?
to put.
You
I'm
studied all
sorry.
that before? You studied all that
Yeah,
before the wow, that's a
absolutely.
great why do
And
you
I
think
was
that
just
is?
willing. I was.
No, why do you think you were able to study all that's a great
Yeah.
point that I wanted to stop you real quick. Why do you think even with the
No, no, of
knowledge that you
course.
had, you still fell into Scientology? So you weren't
For
proofed up
me,
against yeah, yeah.
oh no, for me, I think what it was is I was convinced by Scientologists, number one, that there was a short-term goal for me and a long-term goal. The short-term goal was to do Scientology in order to know whether or not it's for you for yourself. So that
Mhm.
BS about it isn't true unless it's true for you.
Right,
Then they hit me with the long-term goal, which was again, come to Los Angeles. You can be a writer, an
right,
actor, live your life.
right, right.
That made me put aside some of the things that I was seeing
Mhm.
because those goals and ideas were more important. And the
Right.
other thing that I also spoke a little bit with Aaron was when I was introduced to Scientology concepts, reactive mind, E-meter, ARC triangle, I didn't know anything about that. And so I thought to myself, well, if the internet didn't teach me about the basics of Scientology, like the eight dynamics and whatever,
Mhm.
then you know what? Maybe everything that is said negative about Scientology
Right.
and L. Ron Hubbard can actually be wrong. And
Right.
so then it becomes a trusting issue. Why wouldn't you trust? I mean, when I was into going to different churches and mosques and whatever, I had no way of not. I had no reason not to be trusting. I mean, why is
Yeah.
someone who's Hindu, they're going to tell me, say, what does it mean to be Hindu? They're going to tell me. It was
Right.
the same. And so when you say religion, um, maybe it's how some people are grown up. Not every religious person is morally good. I'm not making that statement,
Mhm.
But there's a certain level of trust. Well, that person's a minister, so I can trust them. That person's a monk, I can trust them. And for the most part, when you ask people who are religious about some of their feelings and their pathways and paths of doing what they're doing, they will be honest with you.
Mhm.
Scientology creates that facade through these goal setting and through these gimmicks, but you really should not be trusting of them. It's not that you shouldn't
Right.
be trusting of everyone. It's really, I think, no matter how the Scientologists look, no matter how much they smile and how purposeful they are, they're the ones you don't trust. You don't have
Mhm.
to be Muslim, but if you ask any mom what does it mean to be a Muslim, they're going to tell you, and it's not going
Right.
to cost money, and they're not going to make excuses.
Right.
And sure, there's some people that are more strong, like you have to do this, but most people are not that way. Most people are pretty moderate and they're pretty comfortable in their beliefs. There are fundamentalist groups, of course, where that is different, but Scientology is just, it's not, to me, it's not a religion. It's sort of a mix of, I don't know, self-help and maybe like a private club. Once you get up to the, I like to say it's like a mix between like yeah, self-help and the diners club. Those
Right.
expensive credit cards, right? Like to me, that's what
Yeah.
the OT
Yeah.
feels like. It feels like the Visa Black access only
Yes,
club,
exactly.
where you have to have $1 million in assets every year
Yeah.
just to maintain your membership.
Yes. It's very similar to
Um,
that, yeah.
exactly, and I'm not like that.
Yeah, me
So
neither.
at least for me, that these were kind of those observations. So you know, I think that's why people get in. I do really do think, again, it's a process. It starts with
Mhm.
them deceiving you, pushing your critical thinking away, and then adding
Mhm.
more and more trust. And again, it's not a perfect prism, but that's kind of some of the steps. And what I like to also tell people that are watching too is just imagine someone from your life that you really trust, like a best friend or
Exactly.
whatever. You
Exactly.
probably will, if they give you advice, you'll probably take it. Like it's not perfect, but a perfect example. But you know what? If your best friend said, "Hey, they told you something, whatever, something happened in the
Right.
news, something happened, whatever, they believe in something, you're going to trust that person, and you might find out later that it was false, but you're not going to necessarily
Yes.
break up with that person just because of one little thing. So it's kind of like that too. And again, the more that they get to you, the more lies they tell you, the more gimmicks they tell
Mhm.
you, and then it just kind of spirals. Um, but that's how at least it happened for me, that I can recall. And of course, I do know that everyone is different. Maybe I was a little bit too trustful in some ways. Again, I didn't really have those strong critical thinking shields, so to speak.
Mhm.
But you know, if
That
I
can
always
be a
like to say,
good.
if I haven't, I wouldn't be here talking about it.
That's true, and Mark,
Yeah.
you just done such a great job of just articulating the Scientology experience from the perspective of someone, again,
Thank
who's
you.
not born in, just a
Yeah.
seeker, and also, I don't think that's a bad quality necessarily, Mark. It's like,
No,
I
not at
was too
all.
trusting too, and I've learned to put up walls.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that a cult does and that my parents introduced me to is removing the boundaries, and that e-meter gets in
Yeah.
between you and your boundaries, so you tell things you shouldn't. And when I got out, I'd babble
Mm.
too much. I'm too open or whatever. So I've had to learn how to put up boundaries. That's okay. I was taught that having boundaries
Mhm.
is just I must have something to hide. I had to restructure my entire personality when I got out, and I'm still working on it. But I just love the
Yeah.
explanation that you gave of answering all the critical points where an outsider might have question marks on, well, how does this happen or how does this happen? And just the way you laid it out. I mean, I lived basically what you did, minus the fact that I was more or less born into it. But I and everybody else goes through that
Mhm.
same process. It's step by step. It doesn't happen overnight. We're not hit with Xenu or any of the crazy shit. It's simply tools for
No.
life and then just everything that Mark just described.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you would like to say that we missed, like in conclusion? And do you have, if you'd like people to contact you too, now would be your time. I don't know if you
Yeah.
want to or not, but did we miss
Well,
anything, Mark,
I
that you
think
wanted to say?
unless you Nothing too much. I wouldn't mind if we could even do it again, just to maybe, if you wanted to, of course, if you think
Sure,
that's a good
you're
idea,
always welcome.
to
Can
sort
I
of
say one thing on that real quick, Mark? I was actually
sure,
gonna ask
sure.
you if you wanted to come back, but I didn't
Of
wanna. I was
course.
looking at the time and I was like, I don't know if you'd want you. I would actually really like to have you back because I feel like I have a lot more questions I wanna ask you, and I wanted to get your
Sure,
I've listened to
sure.
your other 2 videos, so now you have more to say,
Mhm.
and I just love the way you
Perfect.
actually break this thing down. So would you mind if we
Thank
did
you.
a part 2 and we'll cover some
Not at all.
more. I have an idea of
Yeah,
what I
I
already
would.
wanna ask you.
I would also really like to to get some of your perspective, Doug, being an actor in Los Angeles, because
Sure.
for me, I had a taste of that when I was in
Mhm.
college, but the idea of being, a working actor, going to auditions, going to classes, that stuff, I did a little taste of
Oh,
it,
we
and
should.
it
Mhm.
fascinates me. So I would love, for example, to go through maybe some of those details of my
Sure.
experience in the industry, go through some of the things that got me to Scientology, and then go through some of the things I did afterwards. Because honestly,
Yes.
my whole thing is, if I've ever meet someone who's an actor in Los Angeles, since I was a child, I've always wanted to, delve into some of the things. And so I would love to see how that relates into Scientology, because for me, again, that was a
Sure.
big reason of why I got in. So for
That'll
context,
Yeah,
basically,
yeah. That's perfect,
I
by the way.
apologize. No, no, go ahead, Doug. Go ahead, Doug.
We're on a delay, by the way, to the audience, so nobody's I'm not
Yeah.
trying to interrupt him. We're on a 2-second delay. I don't know how this is gonna come out in the recording, but I know that you guys are gonna be able to at least hear it. But, hey, that's a
Mm,
great idea. I'll talk to you off air about what we can do, but,
of
yeah,
course.
you just made another good point. So many people that's Steve Mango, who we were talking about, and so many other
Yeah.
hopefuls get sucked
Yeah.
into it because they want to be an actor, an artist, a musician. That's their
Yeah.
purpose, and they've stole so many good people, Mark, locking them in this cult.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Alexandra Powers, who was a successful actress. Now she's been in the Sea Org.
Okay.
Every time I saw her around Celebrity Center, her heart looked
Oh,
like it was broken because she's not living her purpose, but she's every day. Oh, it's just so amazing how many artists they've stolen their lives from, that would be artists that were supposed to become artists, and then also artists who are successful, like a Tom Cruise or a John Travolta, and then they're used
mhm.
to pimp out Scientology. Hey, why don't we talk about the industry element of Scientology, because that's where they trap a lot of people, and
Yeah.
then we'll discuss that together. And like I said, I really like how you can self introspect and look back at your experience and explain it all. So we'll
Mhm.
do that on part 2 if you want. It's a hugely important topic. That's probably Tom Cruise is probably the single most important person in terms of driving in the most people in Scientology.
Oh, yeah.
Because, when
Yes.
it comes to celebrities and all that stuff, I don't know what it is about the human race. I gotta say, I've never really looked up to any of those. Even when I was acting, Mark, I didn't
Yeah.
like most of the people in Hollywood because they're arrogant and they're kind
Yeah.
of self-serving. Not
Yeah.
all of them. And also, there's not a lot
Mhm,
of
mhm.
talent. I never was into Tom Cruise when I was into Scientology. I was into people like Gary Oldman and stuff
Mm.
like that, people that had real chops or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah.
But that's just me.
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm a character actor type, but we can
me
get into
too.
that because
Yeah, we'll
of
talk all
casting and
about
stuff
that,
like
dude.
this. Yeah,
We could
I
talk
would
so
love to
much
do that. I
about
have
just that element, and oh, I can't wait to do that, my man, because there's a lot we can talk about Scientology and the entertainment industry, and we can go off on
Oh my god.
endless riffs on that. Yeah, okay, I didn't mean
Um,
to interrupt you. Sorry, Mark. Could you
no, no,
please
just
finish
for the
off
last
whatever
one
you
for
were
context.
saying, and
So
then yeah, yeah.
I am on social media, but I usually keep that a bit private. So if
Mhm,
anybody sort of wants to follow or anything, I do make time to come on like live, like Aaron's podcast live and stuff like that. And a lot of
mhm.
people like to ask questions there, just because social media for me, I'm not on it a lot, and I'd rather
I
keep it
understand.
just to people that I know.
I
So,
feel you.
but again, if you have any questions or anything, even send to Doug. We can do it the next time. If there's maybe some questions or comments, we can go through there. I also really like to answer people's questions. It's just the getting like DMs and PMs tends to be a little cluttered for me personally. But if
Mhm.
there are questions, if people want to leave in the comments or whatever, I will answer them for you as the best that I can.
Excellent, and my man, I really appreciate you speaking out, having the courage to come on and sharing your story because, every person, helps to spread more awareness about
Absolutely.
Scientology, and we'll never know the statistics, Mark, on how many people preventatively didn't get into Scientology by people speaking out. So thank you for your
Yeah.
time today, my friend.
Mhm.
And we'll talk about part two,
Thank
because
you.
you just got me really excited about a whole avenue, an important avenue about that we can talk about in the next one. So thank you and have a good day, my friend.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you so much.